Delivery room drama. What happened when the baby didn't look like dad? A hospital where I was a med student had a baby born with a very serious genetic condition. Parents came in for genetic counseling, and testing revealed the woman's husband didn't carry the alpha gene of that condition. The couple asked what was the chance another baby of theirs would have this condition, and the doctors were honest and told them, well, 0%. They left it at that. My wife grew up in a really small town, but wasn't born there. When she got her first crush on a boy and told her best friend, that friend was like, "Did you talk to your mum yet?" Apparently, adultery was so widespread in this area, it was common practice for girls to talk to their mums about crushes and who the crush's parents were, so that they didn't end up dating their half-sibling. Had a mum-to-be who narrowed the options for baby daddy down to her top 3. She was having a C-section and didn't understand why all 3 potential dads couldn't come into the theater. She then asked if we could rotate them through, and maybe she'd let the one that was there when the baby came out be the real daddy. It took all of my professionalism to smile politely. I've just imagined a 9-year-old one-upping a kid from a gay couple by saying, "Yeah, well, I have 3 dads. Beat that." My wife worked as an intern in a law firm back in 1991. A woman was pregnant and subpoenaing men for paternity testing. She subpoenaed 19 men and all of them tested negative. Must have been a busy weekend for her. Not quite on topic, but African American babies usually are much lighter skin right after birth and then tend to get a little darker. The nurses usually warn the fathers about this, but I guess nobody had told this one guy. We were in a C-section and the baby came out significantly lighter than dad, and we all saw his face drop. Thankfully, the nurses saw it too and told him that the baby looked exactly like him. We all laughed about it later. A lot of white babies come out with blue eyes and lighter hair. I popped out and my mum's very white with blue-green eyes and light brown hair. My dad's a pretty dark Mexican dude. Most of his family was hyped that I had blue eyes, and my mum had to tell him that it wasn't going to last long, and now I have his hair and his eyes. Some of his sisters thought I probably wasn't his since we looked so different. Wait, Caucasians can go through the same transformation as kittens? I thought it was only cats that started off with baby blue eyes and gradually turned into, well, normal cat eyes. I had no idea this was a thing in any other animal than felines. The more you know. A nurse friend of mine told me about helping with a vasectomy when the doctor saw that the patient, a married father of 2 children, was clearly infertile and would have been all of his life. Due to the man taking Valium before the local anesthetic, the doctor made the guy come back for a follow-up where he had to explain the man's medical condition to him. No idea what the fallout was. A friend of mine is going through hell right now for the same reason. He went for a vasectomy and discovered he's been infertile his whole life. He did a paternity test on his 3 kids and none of them are his biological offspring. First, after my friend had the vasectomy, on the follow-up visit, the doctor told him that the chances of him having any kids were honestly miraculous. After he told his sister-in-law, she suggested a paternity test. When I asked him what the issue was, all he said to me, and I'm translating from Dominican Spanish here, is, "There's a couple of tubes missing, brother." The sister-in-law for years had said that her sister was a narcissistic C-word, but nobody took her seriously, not even me. His attorney started both a divorce and a case of impugnación de paternidad. No clue how to translate that. But if this last thing goes in favor of my friend, his name will be erased from the birth certificate, the kids will lose his last name and he'll no longer be recognized as the children's father. So no child support, but also no visitation rights and stuff. This takes time and there's almost no chance of an appeal since the biodad apparently will start the opposite and will sue for acknowledgement of paternity, meaning his last name on the birth certificate. No, my friend won't accuse her of fraud. I asked my dad this when he introduced my friend to his attorney, and they both said that might look vindictive to the court. At most, they could claim bad faith, but that would be a long shot too. Why my friend is going forward with a paternity challenge? Well, the main reason is 2 of the kids look like their mother, and the other one looks like the paternal grandfather, and my friend is afraid that in the future he might start resenting or hating the kids. By the therapist's advice, he's writing letters explaining to the kids why he did it in case one day one of them comes looking for him. No clue what he's writing, that's between him and the kids. The second reason is that he thinks they won't remember him. Third, he says that if he still takes care of the kids, he'd be rewarding his soon-to-be ex-wife and her lover. He's moved in with me and my wife fully, but he's an engineer and he's working in another province and the commute would be 4.5 hours round trip, so he stays at the place his company rented for him, and spends the weekends here for now. And yeah, he's doing better. He's no longer angry and irritable. He told me therapy and my cats have helped. Yeah, he still cries because he misses the kids. He confessed to me that his brain is telling him, F her, those kids aren't yours, but in his heart he knows those are his kids and he'll forever love them, and every night he cries himself to sleep watching pictures and videos of them. Yeah, that broke my heart, and it's the reason I wish I could do more. I worked in a restaurant right after high school, and there's a couple who worked there as well. When the girlfriend got pregnant, she dipped out on him and moved back to her family in Alaska. After a month or so, the boyfriend got enough cash together to go follow her. He dropped out of college and got a job on her dad's fishing boat to support his new family. Months later, the baby is born, and it became more obvious why the girl took off. Because they're both white, and that baby was not. That guy's a class act. It's too bad his girl couldn't work up the courage to tell him the truth instead of just bailing out. Now she looks even worse. My brother's best friend didn't resemble his father while growing up, so he became more and more suspicious. The father eventually did a DNA test, when my brother's friend was 11 or 12, and found out it's not his. The parents split up, with the older daughter, who's 16, going with the father because she resembled him, so he was sure about her. Whenever I hear stories about this, my admiration for my father grows just a little bit more. We now know that my brother, half-brother now I guess, is definitely not my dad's. Dad let me know like 10 years after separating from Mum. He explicitly told my sister and I that we should under no circumstances mention it to my half-brother because he'd be heartbroken. Dad still goes above and beyond to make sure my brother is happy. It's just incredible to watch. Alright, to answer some of the repeated questions I'm getting, you need to tell him everything or you're an awful sister. This isn't how real-life relationships work. This isn't a story of how a friend of mine cheated on her boyfriend, and should I tell her the truth, Redditor-san? Huh? I've known my brother for the 20-odd years of his life. We're each other's best friends. I also know that out of all of us, our parents' separation hit him the worst. As a teenager, he had to live with our mum, who was mentally ill, directly as a consequence of her 7 to 8 affairs becoming public. My sister and I were at college. He didn't tell anyone at the time and put on a strong face then. Now we see how much it affected him, his grades, and his entire personality. Not telling him now is the best thing we could do for him as a family that came to this discussion after hundreds of tears and sleepless nights. I don't expect most of you to understand the hell that this family has been through. As for health issues, we're a family of doctors. He's shown signs of a genetic disorder, and we've screened him for it. Luckily, he only seems to have the trait. There should be no other issues. A bunch of other people here have questioned my father's motives behind telling us the truth. Well, Mum's side of the family spread the rumor that they split up because my dad was having an affair, and that's why he left my mum. The reality is obviously very different. Dad had to tell us, first my sister and then me, when we asked why he would do such a thing. So, in conclusion, my brother shall be blissfully unaware until we feel the time is right, when he's in a better place mentally. We'll love him as we always have, and if I know him, I know that after he finds out, we'll love each other even more. I understand that by posting the story on a public forum, I did open things to judgment, but this is really beyond what I expected. Also, I've noticed that there seems to be an influx of messages to me which I'll politely ignore. Reading these generally sends my mood down, and getting the notifications in general stresses me out regardless of if the intent is good or not. I'll never put myself through that again. And that's all I have to say about that. Yeah, that's for sure one of those case-by-case basis discussions that you honestly need to weigh up depending on the situation of both the family and the individual. I'd say that I'm an advocate of telling people eventually at the right time. An immediate confession without a roadmap for how to deal with the fallout to your brother is a very reckless idea, and you're probably doing the right thing. I'm a midwife. I once had a woman come to my clinic unannounced. She wasn't a patient, but I'm NHS, so I saw her anyway. She had a man with her. She knew she was about 3 months pregnant, but hadn't come in for any antenatal care. I asked if she'd had relations the night before. She'd come in because she had a little bleeding. I looked at the partner, as Mum said yes, and he said, "Oh, nothing to do with me, I'm just the baby daddy." Turns out she had a new boyfriend at home. This was just the guy she'd been with 3 months before. I popped her up on the table to examine her, and straight away had to tell her that she was basically about 5 months along, but I'd arrange a scan to confirm. Baby daddy just got up and walked out. Turns out there was a third guy 5 months ago. I had a patient like this. She was like 28 weeks or something, pretending her last period was 2 months prior to my visit with her, and that this boyfriend of 3 months was the only potential father. When I explained that he was not, she asked what was the latest she could get a termination. Answer: quite a while ago in our area. My mum's friend has 3 sons to her ex-husband. Two of them look like him, the second one looks a lot like the man she left her husband for, but of course they didn't get together until after she divorced her husband. Doesn't help how her new partner very clearly has a favorite kid. My money's on the first husband's child support bill, most certainly including the third child though. Can't think why. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? I had a doctor that thought my boy wasn't mine because he came out blonde with blue eyes. I'm half native with dark hair and green eyes, and my dad is blonde, blue, green eyes guy. My wife's a very dark brunette and her dad is a blonde, blue, green-eyed guy as well. It got grandfathered in. He's tested genetically as mine, but the doctor was very, very iffy. When I was a student nurse, there was this one couple. The mother was Asian and husband was white. The husband had a brother, African American. He's adopted from what I remember. The mother had been in labor for around 12 hours and they were very excited to see their baby. I remember the father had been pacing my entire shift back and forth in the waiting room. When it came time to mount the mother on the table, he asked the doctor if he could be in the room. He was grinning like a madman. It was a very positive energy. You could almost get completely absorbed by it. The doctor was a nice guy. He let us get him some throwaway scrubs and let him stay in the room. All in all, the actual birthing process was pretty standard. However, when the baby came out, then came the rough part. He was a normal, healthy, half-African American boy, around 3 kilos. I just looked at the baby, then looked at the father, and watched his face go from joy to puzzlement to horror in about 10 seconds. The mother called out for her child, and the doctor, being all business, cut and suctioned the baby. I'm pretty sure that at that moment the father broke because he sort of stepped back and kept saying, "What the frick?" under his breath. I didn't get to see much of them for the next 2 hours, but I was there when the mother was brought to her room. Her husband and his brother were there as well, and she was talking to them. From what I saw, she was trying to console her husband, and his brother was trying to hug him. The husband just kind of kept shrugging off his brother's arms and crying into his hands. It was a really tough thing to see, but all in all, it wasn't really as dramatic as you'd expect. Not a doctor, but I worked in adoptions. A couple showed up wanting to discuss adoption. She was so obviously pregnant. The catcher, she and he both insisted that they'd never had any sort of relations of any kind, only heavy petting, and they assume some splooge had travelled through clothing. I don't know what happened because they never came back. This was all an assumption from me, but my assumption was that she did the deed with someone, just not the man who she was in a committed relationship with. I was a nurse for a urologic surgeon, so lots of vasectomies. Guy came in, teed off that he'd gotten his wife pregnant after his vasectomy. He had never originally followed up to make sure his swimmers were dead. The doctor had him leave a sample to look under the microscope. Went back to the exam room and told him his vasectomy had actually been completely successful. The guy just walked out. I'm a doctor, and the story actually involved my college. So I'm friends in med school with this guy who we'll call Nut. We're not close friends, but we have some common friends, and we shared some rotations together. And this girl, we'll name her Mary. Mary was already married at the time and had a 3-year-old daughter. Nut and Mary were close, but Mary got held back because Mary got pregnant and therefore had to temporarily stop studying. During that time, me and Nut became interns, and Nut began hanging out often with another girl named Belle. Nut and Belle weren't that close or physical with each other, so it came as a surprise when 2 months before internship ended, we found out that Belle was pregnant. Turns out that the two were fun buddies the entire time. Anyway, they graduated, and eventually Belle gave birth to a baby boy who looked like Nut's miniature clone. It was as if the baby got nothing out of the mother, at all. Some of us even joked that Nut's seed was just that strong that he doesn't create offsprings, he creates clones. Now, Mary eventually caught up with her studies and entered junior internship, so she got to rotate with some of us. And when she showed us the picture of her baby boy, he also looked exactly like Nut. Note that we know what Mary's husband looked like and what Mary's daughter looked like. Her son looked just like Nut. So much so that if you placed her son beside Belle's, you could easily mistake them as twins. And listeners, you'd better believe that we compared those two photos next to each other. Not sure what happens to them now. I moved to a nearby hospital, but I never really talked to any of the three. But last I heard from Nuts and my mutual friends, Nuts' partner, he claimed he won't marry her, and her son were left in a city around 4 hours away. Belle worked there. Mary's husband, daughter, and son were in the US. Mary's husband was studying aeronautics or something similar, and Nut and Mary were on duty the same day at the same hospital. Well, looks like Nut might have lived up to his namesake. Sorry for the crude joke, but you guys set me up. Doesn't seem like a stand-up guy from the limited info we have, but it might be coincidence with Mary's kid, you never know. I read an article several years ago about a doctor who was involved in the studies about the Rh blood factor in the late 1930s or early 1940s. The study took place in a New York maternity hospital and was done with married couples. Blood samples were taken from newborn babies, the mother and father, and then tested. In about 10% of the cases, the results of the blood tests for a couple just didn't match what the Rh factor should have been. The doctor went to the mothers alone and asked if the husband was actually the father. Most of these women admitted the husband wasn't, or he might not be. This was back in the 1930s and 40s with married women. My husband is a surgical technician. Years ago, he helped deliver a baby via emergency C-section. The baby was black and born to two very white parents. The dad freaked out and left the hospital with the mum in tears. The doctor convinced him to get a paternity test, and he did end up being the father. Genetics is weird. I love genetics. We're a white family, but every now and then a much darker baby is born. We have a distant ancestor from Africa, and we still carry that gene, I guess. It's mainly the men that show it, but some of us girls definitely have non-Caucasian elements too. I'm a father who had this happen to them, but it's fine. My wife and I adopted a set of embryos and my wife birthed them. The genetic parents are Chinese and Korean descendants. My wife and I are of European descent. We let the doctors know, and they all agreed to not tell one of the doctors in training who was a resident or something like that. When he'd come in to wiggle the twins' legs and do all the stuff, he'd look at my kid's eyes and then nervously glance at me, then do his exam and quietly walk out. I asked him a few questions about why they had such dark hair when my wife and I are lighter haired. He responded about grandparents and recessive genes. Pretty good future doc. On our second to last day in the hospital, the staff told him and he was very relieved. He was scheduling a chaplain visit for us. I work in an NICU, and frequently babies will come down to our units accompanied by their father while mum is still getting stitched up, and it's usually the time when fathers will question us about how to do a paternity test, or they'll ask us questions like, "Does this baby look half black to you?" or "Would you say this baby could be mine or not?" We've also had an occasion where mum has admitted to us that dad isn't baby's father, but we're not legally able to say anything, so we just have to pretend we know nothing. And we'll just submit a social work consult to look into the situation a bit more later. I know a couple that were very excited to have twins. Baby birthday comes, and mum and dad are in the delivery room, baby one comes out, and it's immediately clear they aren't his. He's white, she's white, and the babies are not. The community was shooketh. They're divorced now. A few people are commenting that it could be a throwback to a few generations ago. It wasn't in this case. The DNA tests proved that they were in fact the children of her co-worker. My dad told me this story. He was a non-commissioned officer in the army, and one night he received a call that the wife of one of his soldiers was in the hospital having a baby. His first response was, "So why are you calling me?" It turns out that the wife was 99.9% sure that the baby wasn't his, and she needed someone to make sure he didn't go crazy at the hospital. So, my dad drives down there, and he finds his soldier trying to push past the doctors into the delivery room. He's screaming that he has a right to be in there. My dad puts his hands on his shoulder, a preface to physically restraining him, and tells him that he can't go in. The guy must have realized that he wasn't getting in there because he just sank to his knees and started crying and kept saying, "I just wanted to see my son being born." It was apparent that he wasn't going to hurt anyone, so they got him to the waiting room, and my dad left thinking, I just watched the end of someone's marriage. Come Monday morning, the guy comes in with the biggest smile, walking around showing everyone pictures of his black baby. This guy was white, by the way. Of course, they questioned and ribbed him about it, but he'd just proudly say, "That's my son." Best case scenario to a messed up situation. I'm not sure how the family is doing now, but it seems like the kid would grow up with a father or two who loved him. Okay, I've got two stories that aren't exactly what you asked for, but still applicable, I think. One, a woman came to the ER with abdominal pain. She was there with her girlfriend. We ran a pregnancy test as per protocol. You don't ever trust a patient when it comes to their bedroom history. So I got to break the news to this lesbian couple that one of them was unexpectedly pregnant. And yes, I tried to discreetly tell the patient the news alone, but she insisted that anything I had to say should be done in front of her girlfriend. Okay, but I don't think that was the prize she was expecting. Baby daddy showed up. Commotion ensued. Security had to get involved when the girlfriend started attacking baby daddy. And second, a teenage mum brought her newborn to the ER to be evaluated for something fairly minor. She was a new parent, didn't really know what she was doing. There was also this teenage guy in the room, so I asked his relationship to the patient. He said he was the stepdad. Apparently, he'd been dating the mum for about a month. The baby was about 3 weeks old. It took me a few minutes to wrap my head around that one. For his own sake, I really hope that dumb guy didn't sign the birth certificate. When my wife was in the hospital giving birth, there was another girl in the same room. Her husband was absolutely in love with her and soon-to-be-born son. I spoke a lot with this guy. We talked about how we're going to play with our kids and so on and so forth. After the birth, I never saw him again. But I saw the child. No way it was his. By the time she was in the hospital, he moved out and filed for divorce. She tried to sue him for child support and won. He left the country and doesn't pay. She's struggling with huge financial problems. My wife still has contact with her. No happy ending there. When did you realize your brain's autopilot was a complete idiot? I was getting ready for work and had a contact lens in one hand and a vitamin in the other. I popped the contact in my mouth and washed it down with a glass of water. I'm sure the stomach acid took care of it? When I was around 13 or 14, I woke up in the middle of the night in my own bed and room and thought to myself, I need to go home before my parents realize I'm not there. So I sneak out of the house, part of me obviously aware that my parents were sleeping and that I needed to be quiet, and walked a block away. Then I realized I'd been in my own room and just thought, what the hell am I doing? So I walked back and snuck back into bed. So weird. Painting a picture, took a drink from the paintbrush water instead of my coffee. Swished my mouthwash for a solid 30 seconds and then just spit it up on the floor where I was standing. Last night I picked up a box of cereal to put it away. I ended up accidentally taking it with me to bed. Ugh, you two have fun there? I once got my car impounded via brain autopilot. I lived across the street from a gas station and didn't drive very often. Once I was filling up, went inside to buy something, forgot I was getting gas and just walked home. A few days later, I reported my car stolen since I couldn't find it in my apartment garage. About a month later, I got a call from the cops saying my car had gone up for auction, and only then was it discovered it had been reported stolen. I had to pay about $1,500 in impound fees to get it back. Definitely one of the dumbest things I've ever done. The night before my very first day at work, where I was to bring my own lunch, I got all of the ingredients out to make a sandwich for tomorrow, and immediately after I made it, I walked into the living room, turned on the TV, and ate it. You know, the two that come to mind are while playing Xbox, I got up to get a drink, then sat back down and couldn't find my frickin' controller. I was tearing cushions apart, looking under stuff, looking in drawers. Turns out I took a soda out of the fridge and put the controller in the spot I took it from. The other one happened the other day. I drove home from work, parked, went upstairs, opened the door and started to take off my shirt. Then I remembered it was the middle of my shift and I hadn't left to go home, but just to go buy a drink. Vigorously picking my nose while holding a cigarette and driving. I crammed a lit cigarette up my nose. Oh my God! Kind of a miracle you didn't crash your car. Well, with any luck, you might have put yourself off two bad habits at once, because there'd definitely be a negative association with both of those activities from then on in. I was jogging late at night. A guy reached out his hand in front of me as I passed. I high-fived him. Turns out he was hailing a taxi. I rubbed aftershave in my hair and then put gel on my face. The worst part was that after I put the aftershave in my hair, I laughed at myself, thought, frick, what was all that about? And then I added the hair gel to my skin. I had a very long day of computer drafting. Think like 12 plus hours sitting and staring at 0.5mm lines, and I got really lost. So I asked the person next to me what the heck I did wrong, because they seemed like they'd absolutely have the explanation. I got most of the way through the answer before I realized not only had I asked my frazzled reflection a question, but I'd also calmly and matter-of-factly responded. I went home after that. Applying deodorant on my armpit with my shirt still on. I meant to put a brand new roll of toilet paper on the roll and instead just plopped it in the toilet. When I was in high school and living on the family farm, I used to feed the horses and barn cats every morning. Waking up at 6 a.m. for this as a 16-year-old guaranteed that I was half asleep while I did this chore. So I grabbed the food like I always did, walked to the table where my cat's bowl was, like I always did, and poured some in. My cat always jumped up on the table right away to start eating it, and one morning, as something jumped up in front of me, I absent-mindedly petted it, as usual. The hair felt a little rough, so I looked down, and instead of my friendly orange cat, there was a skunk, just chilling out there eating the cat food while I pet its back. My uncle has a similar story. After a long night of hosting a barbecue with friends, he's sitting out in his yard just looking at the stars. The dog was wandering around and he called her over. She doesn't come at first, but he calls her a few more times and she makes her way over. He reaches down to pet her and notices something off for a moment. Instead of her fluffy, curly fur, it was rough. He looks down and realizes he's been calling and petting a raccoon. He says the raccoon was giving him the look of, "Hey man, why did you stop?" As a teenager, I worked at McDonald's. My McDonald's was 24 hours, and during the summer, I worked the overnight shift. My sleep schedule would get all messed up. My parents woke me up for dinner one evening. I zombie walked to the table and sat down. My dad asked me to say grace. I bowed my head and said, "Thank you for choosing McDonald's. Might I take your order?" I turned around and went back home because I forgot my car keys. I was driving. Tried to turn the sun off. I had a bad hangover, opened my back door, felt for the light switch. There was no light switch, the light was day. I recently spent 10 minutes on the phone with State Farm trying to pull up my policy, getting increasingly annoyed at the fact they couldn't find my policy number. Then I remembered, I have Progressive. I've never had State Farm in my life. I used to work at McDonald's drive-thru, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, so I'd been hardwired to say, "Welcome to McDonald's, how can I help you today?" Every single time I heard the headset beep. Straight up Pavlovian. One day, there was this particularly wily fly that was always just a second ahead of me. I became very focused on killing this fly. I don't know how many times I said it before a coworker finally stopped laughing long enough to tell me, but it turns out I'd been saying, "Welcome to McDonald's, how can I kill you today?" to every car in the drive-thru. Not one customer even paused or acknowledged the fact that Ronald McDonald had threatened their lives with murder. They just wanted their goddamn nuggets. I worked at Sears. During a transaction one time, a guy was paying with a chip card when he asked me what time the store closed. I tried to say, "You can remove your card," and "the store closes at 9 both at once. It simultaneously resulted in, "You can remove your clothes." I drove 20 minutes to my old house after I moved. I was just zoning out. The first day I was in the new place, I ended up at the old building, and it took me 7 or 8 swipes to figure out why my keycard wasn't letting me in. Once I was laying in bed, very tired, watching TV. All of the characters on the show piled into a car together, and I thought for a second, "Oh, I have to put my seatbelt on," before realizing I was safely in bed and nowhere near a car. I drove to work and realized when I got to the parking lot that I'd forgot to drop the kids off at school. The kids knew this too and stayed quiet, thinking they'd get to miss school. I love those sneaky little jerks. I made the best chicken stock ever, lovingly simmered for 24 hours. Then, without thinking, I put the colander in the sink and tipped the stock down the drain, saving the scraps. I cried. I did this exact same thing with some awesome pineapple cider I'd made, after I added the rum. Good rum. I also cried. I'm a barista and I caught myself trying to pour coffee into a cup sleeve, not even attached to a cup. Ouchies, scorched feet. Also, that's hilarious for any customers watching. I mean, you work in a coffee shop and are clearly just not a fan of your own product, because you, my friend, seem uncaffeinated as all heck. I've thrown laundry detergent in the dryer on multiple occasions. I'm also used to starting the morning coffee for the whole office at 6 a.m. in the morning. One time I was late and I autopiloted to the kitchenette. I tossed out a pot of freshly made coffee and started another one. But the worst autopilot I've seen wasn't even my own. It had to be when an ex-girlfriend's dad dropped off my ex's kid at my house. I'd only met the dad a couple of times before. He just drove up to my driveway, let the kid out, waved at me and drove off. After an awkward phone call, we ended up getting pizza and hanging out until the ex got off work to pick her son up. I dropped my pants when going through TSA. For those who fly in the super early morning, it can be rough. I purposefully didn't drink coffee so that I could sleep on the plane. I was on the security line and did the normal routine of taking stuff out of my pockets and putting them in my laptop bag. Then, off with the shoes, placed on top of my luggage, then off comes the belt as usual. Then, of course, when you take off your belt, you take off your pants. No. Damn it. I put them back on and what the frick for a moment as I finished up in security. Luckily, not that many people fly at like 4:30 a.m. Trying to get into a random person's car because I thought it was my friend's. The person whose car I was attempting to break into was very terrified. Once I watched a guy get into a car, close the door, fumble with the steering wheel, open the door, step out, and look at the car for a few seconds, then realize his car was parked right next to it. Gold Grand Am versus a silver Taurus. It was 2 a.m. and way past bedtime, and I'd pulled an all-nighter the previous night as well. While finally clearing the table I was playing video games on, I decided to put all the water bottles away that had been out for days and days. I tossed the empty ones, but my cat was being rambunctious and trying to open the trash can, so I picked her up. I was holding my cat and putting some unfinished water bottles back in the fridge. She struggled free and hopped onto the counter, but I was too tired to scold her, so I continued grabbing huge amounts of half-full water bottles from the counter, we're talking 6 or 7 at a time in both hands, and chucking them in the fridge. I pick them up, put them in the fridge, pick them up, put them in the fridge. I pick her up, I put her in the fridge, and I close the fridge. I took 2 minutes to finish up the dishes. I turned off the kitchen light. I heard faint mewing. I woke up, opened the fridge, and she's so cold, but she's okay. Now every time I open the frickin' fridge, she climbs in. Sometimes I don't notice her and she's trapped for a moment until I hear mewing, and I know it's all my fault. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was playing guitar and reached over to grab a cracker, and then I ate my pick. I sat there at an intersection in suburban Palo Alto at 11 p.m., patiently waiting for the stop sign to change. I was making ramen noodles and a pitcher of Crystal Light at the same time, so berry-flavored ramen is not good. I woke up from a deep sleep having the feeling that there was an earthquake going on, so naturally I called to my wife, who realized I was in the living room reading, and I asked her if everything was okay, and she asked why. I said, "There was an earthquake, is everything okay?" And she said, "No, you just tooted in your sleep and you woke yourself up." I went back to bed. During a period when I was unemployed for a few months, I got into the habit of undoing my trousers before arriving at the bathroom. This led to a very embarrassing situation I found myself in when I became employed again and just undid my belt and trousers in the hallway while heading to the toilet. Thankfully, I realized what I was doing before I exposed myself to my new co-workers. One time, my family traveled to Iowa and we stopped at a McDonald's. They were going through the drive-thru, but I needed to pee, so I went inside. I went out to the other exit when I was done, and there was a red minivan just like ours, so I went to my side and opened the door and wasn't paying attention. I sat down, buckled my seatbelt and realized it was a bit different, but I still did it. I looked around and the van was full of old people just staring at me, and they all looked scared. My family was in the van behind laughing their butts off. I took the metro home and then realized I drove to work. So that was a long night. That sounds like a problem for morning you. When my son went off to college, I was stuck in the same routine that I'd performed day in and day out for close to 18 years. For some reason, this truly threw off my entire thought process for weeks. One morning, I got up and turned on the coffee pot like I normally do and walked to his room to wake him up. However, instead of flipping the light on and telling him it's time to get up, I crawled into his bed and went to sleep. I woke up 6 hours later with both my daughters in the bed with me and the smell of burnt coffee permeating from the kitchen. I honestly didn't think his growing up and moving out would have hit me like that. I eventually stopped making extra breakfasts and trying to wake up someone who wasn't there. It did make me think of my own mother though and how she felt after we grew up and left the house. Let's just say that now, whenever I'm looking for my phone, the first thing I check is to see if it's currently in my hands. When I was in high school, I worked at a McDonald's. Most of the time, I was on drive-thru taking orders. You get the script down and go into autopilot every day you get to work. One day, I'm taking an order and tell the man his total like always and tell him to pull forward to the next window. It takes me about 5 seconds of staring at this man to realize that I'm talking directly to him instead of over the headset. It takes about another 5 seconds for my brain to realize that I'm working the front counter and there's no window for him to pull ahead to. I found myself taking a bath with all of my clothes on. I never told anyone, I just went back to sleep. I drove my car to the student union to pick up a package, and I parked with my hazards on. After I got the package, I got food and proceeded to walk back to my room and play GTA for 2 hours before getting a call from the university police saying to move my car. Yeah, honestly, if I'd had a car during my bachelor's degree, I think the odds of me doing this were greater than not. I swear I was in a semi-vegetative state for most of my first year of uni. I turned up at work with the landline phone and my toddler's lunch. I jumped out of bed frantically, put my clothes on, brushed all the crap on my floor under my bed, and paused. Realized it was 3 a.m. in the morning and I didn't have school. I'm 23. After an 8-hour day of cashiering at Target, which has so many robotic small-talk conversations, I stopped at the dollar store. The conversation went something like the cashier asking, "Hi, how are you?" Me answering, "Good, how are you?" "I'm good, thanks." "That's good. Did you find everything okay today?" That conversation was had to the effect of everyone in line and the cashier looking at me like I was a psychopath. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's done awkward stuff on cashier autopilot, but it still sucked. I picked up my toothbrush to brush my teeth, but I also had the urge to go pee, so obviously I tossed my toothbrush into the toilet. After getting my toothbrush, I'll occasionally grab the deodorant instead of the toothpaste and stare at it for a minute while my brain tries to figure out how one's supposed to go on the other. I tried to mail my buddy a check, and it had been a while since I'd mailed anything. Long enough to forget how mail works, apparently. What I did was write my name and address in the center, and his name in the upper left-hand corner. The letter then got returned to me. But still, my first thought wasn't, "Whoops, I failed at mailing this check." Instead it was, "Well, I guess this stamp is old, and the price of stamps went up." So I put another stamp on it and sent it again to myself again. My mailman must think I'm an absolute idiot. Cup of coffee in my left hand, phone in the right. Go to my room, take a sip of my phone, and throw coffee on the bed. Well, I just threw a knife in the garbage and washed some breadcrumbs. There was a 6.0 earthquake at about 3 a.m., so I was asleep. The quake lasted 20 seconds, and I woke up about 16 seconds in, standing in the hallway hugging a vase. What the F? I took the wrong part of my package out at the urinal and I peed my pants. The night before last, I went to the backyard to bring the dog into the house. Autopilot moved my feet 10 or so steps out the door, telling the dog to come in. My brain then caught up to the autopilot and remembered the dog was in fact in bed and I was indeed approaching a black bear that was eating watermelon rinds from the trash can. I walked into the bathroom to pee, and instead of unzipping my fly, I unbuttoned my dress shirt, took it off, then took off my white undershirt as well. Then I realized I was standing shirtless at a urinal, and what the frick? George Costanza? Step 1. Unwrap candy. Step 2. Throw candy in the trash. Step 3. Stare at the wrapper. I tapped a picture in the newspaper, hoping to see the full article. It took me a good 5 seconds to realize where I messed up. My sister had a brain fart and left the water running in the kitchen. I went to turn it off and flipped the kitchen light switch, repeatedly, then started cussing when the switch wouldn't cut the water off. Then I got my toolbox and started taking the faceplate off the light switch so that I could see why it wasn't cutting the water off. At that point, my other sister, who witnessed all of this, kindly pointed out that I'd lost my ever-loving mind and cut the water off herself. Sometimes I'll see something in my peripheral vision, and apparently your brain kind of does this autofill and tells you what you're seeing without actually seeing it. So I'll be walking my dog and see a bush or something and think to myself for a split second, "Oh, there's an ostrich across the street." Then I'm like, "What the frick is an ostrich doing there?" and realize it's just a bush. Got a bag of microwave popcorn and made it halfway up the stairs before I realized I didn't pop it. Put cat food in the coffee maker. 10 out of 10 would not recommend. I'm currently at university and I live on the 5th floor of a dormitory. All the floors are identical other than the colors of the paint on the wall. One day I was taking the elevator up to the 5th floor and I was sending a text to my mother. When I arrived at my floor, a person I'd never seen before got on the elevator. I consciously noted that it was weird because I knew everyone on my floor, but I walked to my room and walked in. My living room seemed slightly off, and then a girl walked into the living room and casually goes, "What are you doing in my room?" That's when I realized I'd gotten off on an earlier floor and just absent-mindedly walked into someone else's room. Needless to say, I got out of that room really fast after realizing what I'd done. I put coffee in my dog's water bowl the other day. It was very early in my defense. There are a lot of people who just apparently should have their pets and own breakfasts in separate rooms, because this is far from the first time feeding an animal while doing other kitchen tasks has resulted in disaster in this video. I'm not sure this necessarily counts, but I'm a sleep eater. In the past 4 months, I've woken up trying to open a can of green beans with my bare hands and drinking from a gallon jug of soy sauce. I was trimming a raw chicken breast and saw a spider in my kitchen. I screamed and immediately threw the chicken breast at the spider and embedded it in the meat. Whoops! To those asking if I ate the chicken breast afterwards, I forgot to mention that the spider was on the floor. Leaving work, I had my hat in one hand and cell phone in the other. Something misfired and I put the cell phone on my head and hat in my pocket. There was a flashing realization that something wasn't right while standing there holding a phone to my bald spot and sporting a look of bewilderment. I wish someone else had seen it. I usually would stop at a gas station in the morning to get coffee. On more than one occasion, I'd open the little flavor cups and pour them in the trash instead of into my coffee cup. Sometimes I'd do this for 3 or 4 of the little cups before realizing what I was doing. I was working at my computer and I had a cookie next to me. I finished the cookie and immediately took a bite out of the mouse. Realized it was hard, sucked on it for a few seconds and then put it down. Only realized what I'd done a few minutes later. What surprised you the most about moving from the third world to the first world? The toothpaste aisle. There is an aisle for toothpaste. It's been almost 25 years and that still boggles my mind. How well lit everything was. It was like looking at Christmas lights and the first time I smelled Burger King and saw a yellow Mustang. When I first came to Canada, it terrified me that people were so nice, especially when it came to traffic. The first few times it happened, I didn't know what the F was going on. I'd be standing in the little gap between the traffic signal and pavement looking at this car that starts slowing down 20 meters in advance. While I watch it, expecting it to go past so I can cross the road, it just stops. And then the driver makes a little hand motion thingy and I'm standing there thinking, do you want me to go? Do you want me to go first? What is this? Is this protocol? Is this what's done here? You wait for me? I, as a pedestrian, have rights and not just a bullseye on my face? So I spent the first year or so just freezing like a deer in headlights every time I had to cross a road. Because a lifetime of playing traffic frogger in Karachi did not leave me with the impression that drivers knew what the brake was for. And Canadians. You're nice. It's damned terrifying. Honduran here who moved to Germany. Being able to walk in the streets with your phone in your hand was a bizarre feeling. Also how everyone was on time. The passengers on trains have little to no instructions and mayhem somehow doesn't break loose. Being able to find a ride online from a stranger and not be murdered along the way. How everyone respected convention. Once I saw a hat on the floor for about as long as I sat there, and nobody picked it up. In Honduras, it had been gone in less than a heartbeat. How they allowed and protected the Third Reich to hold a demonstration. In Honduras, if it wasn't the party in power, they would have been repressed in no time. How I didn't really need a car. I was able to take public transportation with my expensive headphones, book and smartphone in full view. Oh Deutschland, ich vermisse dich so sehr. What surprised my grandmother when she saw Finland was how conservative people were with land usage here. In Nigeria, during imperialism, a lot of land was wasted in grand architecture. I remember going to a university there. From entering the front gate, we had to drive what was at least a half mile before reaching the first building. Otherwise, it was just all grass. Haha, yes, the Nordic countries are quite sparse and compact compared to a lot of places, even other first world countries. But I'd argue there's a lot of beautiful stuff there anyway in the right seasons. You can't beat Helsinki in summer. Air conditioning everywhere. I was amazed at how you can go to libraries and borrow books for free without paying anything. I felt like there had to be some catch, but after asking numerous questions, I complied and got me a library card for borrowing a gazillion books. I was walking around Hong Kong and was astonished to see that someone, presumably on the orders of some local government entity, had put up Christmas lights above the railing on the subway. If they tried that in Manila, it would be gone and sold within hours. I grew up in Kenya as a child, and when I finally returned to the first world, I was surprised how relaxed everyone was about not being mugged. I worked at a hospital in Kenya earlier this year, and the interns there wouldn't let my brother or I go home walking after 7 p.m. because they said it was just too dangerous. We were staying at a church 500 meters down the road that wouldn't take more than 3 minutes to get to. Constantly, people would tell us to watch our valuables, and it became so pessimistic that when we left, we were in that mindset for about a month afterwards. The size of everything. I was picked up from the airport in a Ford Expedition, which was about the size of my house back in Cuba, and then I was taken to a 6-bedroom house. I remember I used to feel uncomfortable in the big rooms, so I would hang out in closets and whatnot at first. On a side note, right before I left, my older brother told me that in the US you could tell the toilets to wipe you, and a hand would come out the back to gently wipe your bum. He went on to specify that I must ask in English, because if I asked in Spanish, the hand would put a finger in my butt. I didn't go number 2 for a week. So I guess another surprise was normal toilets. My mum had to wait in line for bread for 2 hours. 2 hours for frickin' bread. When it was her time to turn in her food stamps, sometimes it had run out. She comes here and there are aisles of bread, rows and rows. White, whole wheat, multigrain, 12-grain, 18-grain. Flax, ancient grain, hot dog buns, hamburger buns, artisanal breads, sun-dried tomato, garlic bread, cheese buns. Cheese bread? It blew her frickin' mind. My father grew up in Sri Lanka, and if you've been to any South Asian country, you'll know that the roads are deadly and nobody stops for anyone. He said the thing that surprised him the most was when he went to England to study and people stopped at the crossing waiting for the man to turn green. When the man turned green, he said it was like magic that all the cars stopped to let people cross the road. Wait, what? Water is free? And free refills? Huh. When I first moved here from the Philippines, I was surprised just how frickin' clean it was. Holy crap, I felt like I could just eat off every gosh darn surface of the airport, whereas the airport in the Philippines would probably give you herpes if you sat down anywhere. Everything wasn't jam-packed to the frickin' gills and nobody was peeing in the street. My uncle joined the Peace Corps and lived in Tonga, a tiny island in the Pacific, for 2 years. One of his friends from his time there went on a road trip to the US and my uncle met her in LA. Anyhow, they got into a cab at the airport and my uncle said that his friend had this terrible look of anxiety on her face and just kept looking around. Her head was just darting around every which way. He asked if everything was alright and she said she was waiting for the high-speed chases, gunfire, and explosions. My uncle had to explain that those sorts of things typically only happen in movies. For her, the only window into the world outside of Tonga was movies she'd seen. It's interesting how media or the lack thereof can shape someone's perceived reality of the world. In the States, when people say, "How are you?" they're really not asking the question. I cringe whenever I think about all the times I stopped for 5 minutes and talked to the people who asked me that question during my freshman year. How much food gets served and/or thrown away? Also, how much fresh produce costs compared to fast food? I used to work in a bakery. Each night we'd throw out at least 6 to 8 bags of fresh bread and cakes. It's devastating to think about all those people who are in hunger, and there I was throwing out perfectly fine food because of some stupid chain store policy. I think what struck me was how sheltered I was in my third world. I pretty much lived in a first world bubble in the third world. Oh, there are a few things. The roads aren't smooth and clean like glasses and mirrors, the girls are not as promiscuous as portrayed in the MTV videos and movies, and there are beggars, we just call them homeless people. Peaches. Delicious, delicious peaches. The majority of you probably think that I'm joking, and I get that because peaches are taken for granted, but when I wasn't living there, I didn't know peaches even existed. Once I came here though and had some, it was frickin' fantastic. Sometimes it's just the little stupid things that are great. Roads are smoother, there are traffic laws and most people abide by them, there's no concept of a line in third world countries, sadly even in China and the Middle East as well, people bargain more in the third worlds, refrigeration isn't standard in third world, things in fridges and coolers at the market are just lit and blowing lukewarm air. Ice is uncommon, if it is around it came from a block of ice. Customer service exists in the first world. Third world you eat what's being made even if it's bad or made incorrectly. You don't like it? Too bad. Fruits are better in the third world. First world fruits most of the time are picked before being ripe and shipped. Diet soda options are everywhere. Both Pepsi and Coke options are everywhere too. Water in most first world countries is drinkable by tap. Third world, not so much. Depending on where you are, showers and toilets are combined. No flushing toilet paper down the toilet in third world countries. Most streets are clean in the first world, trash, litter and garbage is everywhere in the third world. People honk in the third world to tell you they're there. In the first world, honks are used mainly for road raging. That final one is interesting because while it's very distressing for people who aren't used to it, it is technically the correct use of the horn, to announce your presence on the road. We have long since lost that purpose in the first world and it's used as an intervehicular FU. Well, mine's more about a relative, not me. I lived in Australia and I have Vietnamese relatives. Once, a cousin who had lived his life in Vietnam came here to visit. When he arrived, he was so confused. "Dean, what's all this grass in front of your house?" "It's our lawn," I replied. "What's that? Were there animals that graze on it?" "We don't have any animals, no." At this point, he was beyond confused. So what do you do with it?" "Well, we just let it grow, and then when it gets too long, we cut it down and throw it away." I can honestly say with no hyperbole that I've never seen someone so confused. Let me tell you a story. For the first few years of my life, I lived in a rainforest in a little leaf hut with my grandmother. No electricity, no running water, no cars. It was literally a rainforest, and I had no idea what the outside world was like. My father, who lived in Australia, was deported from my country because my family didn't like him. Then decided that at age 7 I would have to come to Australia for my education. The whole experience was surreal to me. I remember flying on the plane and being confused at how such a heavy thing could fly. Even the lights were amazing to me. Turning them on and off was like magic to my mind. When I landed in Australia, my father asked me if I wanted a drink of water, and my reply was, "Well, there doesn't seem to be a river anywhere nearby, so how are we going to get it?" My dad then showed me a tap, and my mind was blown. Where was the river where this water was coming from? The refrigerator also blew my mind. In the village, if we had meat, we'd eat it immediately otherwise, and here was this magic machine that preserved it. He later asked if I wanted to go to the grocery store to get food for dinner. I replied with, "You don't have to grow your own food?" My dad chuckled and we went to the grocery store. I was amazed. Most of these foods I'd never seen in my life, and there was so much of it. Also, I could eat any meat I wanted. I could keep on going with things that amazed me, but really there were so many. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. People pick up poop after their dog craps on the street. In Russia, there's an expression, "Spring will come and crap will float." That's because during the winter, every time a dog takes a dump on the street, it freezes and gets covered by snow. Now imagine the reverse process as it gets warmer. Now, I was young when I came to the US, but I seriously expected flying cars. I was very disappointed. How confident people are and the way they approach and talk with sweetness, especially women, it blew my mind. Everything just works. Banks have no armed guards, and while you're banking, you have no fear that someone in the bank is spotting to see if you take money out to rob you a block away. You stop at a traffic light at 3 a.m. and you actually wait for it to turn green again. You don't just do a rolling stop and run the light for fear of someone hiding in the bushes nearby jumping at you to take your car. A package is delivered to your front door while you're away. You can be 99% sure it will still be there by the time you make it home. Nobody's going to steal it. You have a problem with a company or a product, you can be reasonably certain that companies will try to make it right and not just laugh when you call to complain. If you call the police, they'll actually come to your house. Same for ambulances and firefighters. You pay taxes, but you have good roads, hospitals, police, infrastructure, like phones, streetlights, and water. The politicians caught stealing are out of public life with no hope of being elected again. In some of them anyway. Streets are generally clean and free of graffiti. If you need the justice system, it works reasonably well. Nobody's going to get away with murder because they have connections to a judge. All of these things are non-existent in the third world. Well, Portugal is a fully developed country, and we've recently elected mayors who served time in prison for having stolen from the same cities that were electing them again. Yep, I think this can also happen easily in Spain, Italy, or Greece. I think a lot of Southern Europe countries still have the mentality of, "He robbed us, but he also did good things," that we see in developing countries. From what my friends have told me, supermarkets. They're amazed by its size and vast food selection. The taste of fruit and vegetables and the sense of community. Maybe this was just because fundamentally my family is quite antisocial, but when we lived in Zimbabwe and Uganda, my brother and I were constantly visiting friends and the friends of our parents. But since I've moved to Canada, I only occasionally see my friends outside of school. Not sure if Vietnam counts as third world, but definitely developing. This was 10 to 12 years ago. I was about 11 or 12 at the time. Holy frick, the highway. We landed in LA, and seeing 12-lane both-direction highway in person was mind-blowing. Cars everywhere. Also, the moving sidewalks at the airports. We had escalators, but moving sidewalks were a first. Glorious AC everywhere. Toilet paper. Yep, I was amazed by the amounts of toilet paper available. There were also channels that aired cartoons 24/7, buffets and Salisbury steaks, and Toys R Us. Oh, I was in heaven. I was a teacher in South Korea and had a friend who was a North Korean escapee. Very nice guy and very bright, but the little things were funny. I remember him just being enamored with the little handheld firecrackers we'd shoot off at the beach. Then there was the time he was beside himself with excitement at a movie he'd just seen. He asked if we'd ever heard of it. The movie was E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Growing up in a Muslim country, I was simply amazed at how easy it was to buy beer and adult magazines in the US. As a 9-year-old coming to Chicago from the Philippines, a lot of things definitely caught me by surprise. Before arriving in America, I thought that everything was supposed to look like The Sims. Boxy houses in the suburbs with clean-cut grass and the most regal people imaginable. Instead, I saw many similarities with the Philippines, especially in the urban areas. The poverty, the beggars, and the hardship that many people faced really caught me off guard. I used to think that the United States was the closest thing to heaven, and while I soon learned that America is certainly better overall, I was nevertheless surprised that many people did struggle in the mighty United States. Yeah, it's important to state that a lot of places in first world countries have vast economic disparity depending on where you live. Depending on where you move, it might not be a utopia land that solves all your problems and hands you a job. Plus, there are often rampant biases about migrants in most places, even my beloved country. Mostly, it comes down to expecting lower standards, then being surprised when standards are higher, and then realizing that your third world view is affecting how you live in the first world. Having lived in a first world country for 10 years now, the difference from when I came here to now is huge. Gone are the old attitudes towards courting, race, and money. You question how you ever thought life in a developing country was normal. You question things openly, not in fear of reprisal. There's an open discourse on political issues. There aren't checkpoints at every intersection. People have an opportunity to be whatever they want. You notice things like trades jobs pay more relative to trades in a developing country. You get to see an economy in motion. You're served by and large by a capable police force in the first world. Bribery is not rampant. Education is more freely accessible. Electricity, running water, more than one national newspaper, a more open internet, access to information, great infrastructure for economic development, a chance to see public transport run efficiently, a ridiculous mixture of races and beliefs, a chance to know more than your limited worldview. And if you can't appreciate moving to a civilized part of the world, then maybe it should just chew you up and spit you out. I am who I am today because I was given a chance to see things from a civilized point of view. I lived in Indonesia for 7 years of my childhood, ages 3 through 10, on the island of Sumatra. From a child's perspective, the biggest change was how rarely kids go outside in first world countries. When kids in Indonesia get bored, they go outside by default. I learned to play soccer with a ball that was pretty much rags, in flip-flops or bare feet, on concrete. It was all we did, play outside. When I got home from school, the first thing I'd do was step outside and there was always some neighbor friend who was already out there having fun. Then we moved back to the US and suddenly nobody was outside. The street at my first house in the US had just as many kids as my street in Indonesia did, more even. But if I went outside or rode a bike or kicked a ball around, I could be out there for hours without ever seeing another kid. Because in first world countries, we have so many passive, indoor activities that we can enjoy by ourselves or with only people we invite over, and there's no longer a need to go outside for entertainment. That took a lot of getting used to. Also, pants. Indonesia's on the equator, so I literally never wore pants, just shorts. I even called pants long shorts for a long time. And vacuum cleaners terrified me because all the floor there is tile to fight the heat, plus it's cheap. Both of those things were just a culture shock, though. They don't have a lot to do with third and first world transitions. Gosh, I could spend days talking about this. Honestly, I think the world would be a much better place if every kid spent a year or two of their formative years in another country, or at least a different region of their country. It's such a big part of who I am in so many ways. How easy it was to gain weight. Same. I knew Americans were fat, but damn. There's no community in the first world. I live in Southern California, so I do hear it's different than other places in America. Growing up, I knew all of my neighbors. People would just walk into my house, show up for a quick bite to eat or coffee just because they were nearby. I currently live in a series of townhouses with most of my neighbors my age, and I know one of their names only because my roommate was hitting on her and freaked her out. Wait, so you're telling me you have so much clean water that you go number 2 in it? Huh. How much you all take everything you have for granted. Like it's just normal for survival to be so easy for you guys. As somebody from the third world, I was really surprised at how cold the nights get in first world Mercury. You never expect that from a planet so close to the sun. I grew up in East Africa. I live in the United States. Everyone is loud, from the little kid to the tall shy nerd, loud and eloquent. It blows my mind every time. Also, 9 out of 10 white people try too hard to avoid awkwardness, such that it comes out counterproductive, and almost everyone is just super awkward. I work in retail, by the way. Can confirm, I'm American and I've been told by people from other countries that I'm astoundingly loud and awkward. But some parts of the first world are still third world. My mum teaches high school in rural Georgia. The county she teaches in has a 46% literacy rate. Let that sink in. Less than half the people in that county can read. That's not supposed to happen in a first world country. Where I came from, small things made us happy, like playing around on dusty ground with a football made out of plastic bags strewn together into a ball with string, using small rocks as goalposts. Or we'd just walk around and talk. No matter how hungry or poor people were, they found joy in something. When I moved to a wealthier country, fellow peers were so moody and full of angst. Hanging out meant sitting together in a room playing Game Boys, this was the 90s, or watching movies, with nary any actual personal interaction. Pizza that you made yourself at home, which was cheaper, is apparently a no-no. If you bring food over, it has to be Domino's or something. Oh, and God forbid you wear the same clothes to school. Ironically, in some schools, this actually makes you more elite. I left the USA at 6 and moved back in at 18. Life was very different living in a small village in the Philippines. We collected rainwater off of our roof into barrels, iodined it, filtered it, and then boiled it so that we could have clean drinking water. We had a solar panel on the roof that charged a truck battery during the day. It gave us enough electricity to run a fluorescent bulb at night. And the biggest surprise? All the bottled water. We have a miracle flowing out of our tap every time we turn the faucet. A freaking miracle, and yet everyone complains and moans about the taste, so they pay to have someone else's tap water in bottles. I don't get it. Water is precious and nobody seems to care. What do people do to make themselves look cool that actually makes them look like a D-bag? Those people who are weirdly proud of not reading a book since high school. Constantly telling people about the women they've done the deed with or were otherwise involved with. I knew a guy like this in college. He was one of the most obnoxious guys I've ever known. This dude in high school tried to convince me that he had lain with my 21-year-old Christian married sister. I had to sit next to him in math class and all he talked about was how many girls he had been with. Ugh. Pretending to know or to be something when you actually have no idea. When I was younger, the only thing that anyone ever noticed me for was my knowledge, so naturally I assumed that more knowledge equaled better person. Of course, I wanted to be a good person, so when I didn't have any more knowledge left, I started making up stuff to keep my non-existent reputation. And damn, did I make up lots of BS. I'm trying not to do that anymore though. Bragging about how many people you've slept with. Bonus for referring to them as a body count. I have a coworker who has the, quote, gift of gab and is very proud of his ability to give people false assurances while being extremely vague, essentially just bombarding them with words until they're satisfied. It's a useful trick, I suppose, but when you hear him do it in real time, you realize he's just a very good liar. Being a butthole to other people to boost your own ego. Creepy flirting at the gym. Picking on someone in a group and trying to get everyone else to laugh at them. Not in a, hey, everyone's joking around kind of way, in a, being a nasty piece of work and embarrassing the person kind of way. People like that suck. I had this happen to one of my friends once. He's disabled, so D-bags always tried to pick on him in middle school. He was actually in a group of popular people in class, and one of the other popular guys said, "Hey, by a show of hands, who's the guy you hate most in the group?" Hoping that everyone would vote against my friend. Then they all proceeded to vote against the same guy who called the vote. It was the funniest thing. Well, he effed around and found out, didn't he? I think if your group of friends are mostly good people, they're most likely to automatically point to the one member trying to create dissent and poor feeling, aren't they? Hope you learned from the experience, jerky dude. I've been on dates with people who were dismissive or rude to the servers, and it was a huge turnoff. A friend of mine once brought another friend that I'd never before met to our weekly trivia night. This girl was the biggest witch to the server that we see almost every single week, to the point that she wrote her a snotty note on the receipt when she paid. There wasn't anything particularly wrong with the service, she was just being rude as a standard action. That was an instant, well, you're never invited back here moment. People who pick fights. The ones who don't know how to get attention, so they start gossiping about everyone. I'm like, I know your life isn't interesting, but please have some respect for others and for yourself. Endlessly talking and bragging about their private lives. For an example, I had a real prick of a boss who once said, "Man, it wasn't yesterday I got with that woman," after a customer left, which made me and my colleagues somewhat uncomfortable. He also talked about how his wife better show those TTs for everything he does. I'm not interested, and I think it's super trashy to talk like that. People who vandalize the rocks, trees, and stuff in parks and nature reserves. It takes you out of the experience when you're scanning a gorgeous landscape and your eyes land on a love heart containing the words "Butthead plus Ding Dong Forever," or whatever their names are, in bright colors. Okay, this one's very specific, but I once knew a bloke who thought he was really cool for not liking Game of Thrones, which is fine, but he'd then post spoilers of it on social media along the lines of, "I don't watch or care about Game of Thrones, but X character died in the most recent episode. Unlucky if you saw this post." I fell victim of it once, and I literally thought my blood was boiling. I was so angry. The lesson here is probably to stay off social media before you've seen the most recent episode of a show that you love, but still, screw that guy. Being mean to your serving staff. It doesn't make you look assertive, it makes you look like an ass hat. Picking on the weird kids. I feel really guilty about this one. I was bullied and picked on from an early age. I felt completely disconnected from my peers around me, but when the new kid came around and they gave me an opportunity to feel accepted, I took it. That kid was a complete jerk himself, which was why I excused picking on him at the time, but looking back, it was just really cruel, and the reason why he was a jerk was probably a defense mechanism. Sharing their trashy taste in music out loud on public transportation. Even if it's good music, everyone in the bus is getting out of work or school, they're tired, and they don't want to listen to your music plus the sound of people speaking plus the sound of the road, etc. It's just too much when you're tired. You know what annoys me worse than anyone being actively mean? People trying to do something nice for someone and videotaping it for clout on social media. Whenever someone gatekeeps a music artist like they discovered them and they're the whole reason for that band's success. Don't get me wrong, you should support the artist, but don't be that butthole that determines who is worthy of a common trend. The Strokes were getting it about a month or two back. One of the songs from the album they released last year blew up on TikTok, and people were attempting to gatekeep the band as if they hadn't been together for 23 years, won 4 Brits and 1 Grammy, before that song got big on TikTok. Look, failing school doesn't inherently make you a D-bag, but bragging about it as if it's something that's cool isn't the best presentation of character either. Teachers who are proud of many of their students not passing. If I ever get a teacher like that, maybe I should ask why they're proud for being a bad teacher. I had a professor like what you described, and I switched majors because she taught quite a few classes in my major. First day of class, she told everyone that you'll be lucky to get a C on your own. First couple of tests, I studied my butt off and I got like a 12% grade after the first month. I looked at the classes I had to take and she taught 3 or 4 more of them, so I changed my major because I knew I wouldn't be able to get past her. It's horrible that a major crossroads in your life was determined by a crap teacher. Handing a homeless guy a $10 bill and posting it on YouTube. The line between joking and bullying can be a thin one, and a lot of D-bags either don't see it or they just don't care. Also important to note that the line moves depending on who you're with and your relationship with them. It can be tough to walk the line, but my general rule is if everyone isn't laughing, including the person the joke is aimed at, you might need to pull back a bit. People who tease guys for drinking girly drinks. If a guy wants to drink a strawberry daiquiri, let him drink it in peace. You know what's manly? Drinking whatever the frick you want without giving a crap what people think. Blasting music in public transportation without headphones. God, I want to scream at everyone who does this on New York City subways, but they're 100% looking for someone to start some crap with them. Yeah, that's the thing. Sure, maybe some of them are just obnoxious, but on the off chance that it is someone who's mentally prepped for a fight and is going to follow you down the train heckling you if you back off, it's not worth it unless you're also dying for a scrap. Gatekeeping a fandom or hobby. You aren't a real fan of XYZ band if you started listening to them after this album, or you're not a real beer drinker if you don't like IPAs. Excuse me, are you gatekeeping? How dare you? Hey, gatekeeping is my gatekeep. Supporting a celebrity who doesn't give a crap about your existence online to the extent of bullying and name-calling people who don't worship that celebrity. Using a cell phone in public on speaker. Get a headset. Personally, I find this practice about as acceptable as tooting in a crowded elevator. Even worse is playing music from your phone in public. I always thought that these people being insane or having such little amounts of personality that they think the musical performance will make up for it. Judging another person for their interests, even if the other person's interests don't affect or hurt anyone else. The other day I had an acquaintance tell me how a friend of mine who likes to collect Funko Pops must be such a virgin, even though the guy is literally married with a kid on the way. I mean, Brandon Moreno, the new UFC flyweight champion, is one of the biggest badasses in the sport and collects Funko Pops extensively. Driving around residential areas too fast in cars with really loud engines and those exhausts that go bang, bang, bang all the time. They look like nothing other than inconsiderate buttholes. Don't forget the subwoofer system that rattles every window in the house from blocks away. It amazes me that they can even see where they're going with all that vibration. I've said it before, I was a butthole teenager. I did a lot of stupid stuff in my time. However, I always turned down my loud stereo system in residential areas and after a certain time at night. You can be a butthole, just don't be that butthole. That whole I don't give an F attitude online where people just hate everyone and be super edgy. It doesn't make you look cool, it just makes you look like a tryhard. I think people look at not giving an F the wrong way. Personally, I really don't give an F what anyone else thinks of me, but I also try not to give people reasons to actively dislike or hate me, and if I happen to do or say something that hurts someone else unintentionally, I have the capacity to accept responsibility and apologize. It's possible to not give an F and also not be a butthead. It's really not that hard to do. So in many schools during COVID, we couldn't leave the classroom during the break, and my classmates fricking loved to make or watch TikToks on full fricking blast. They did it for the whole fricking year of 2020 and 2021. My coworker did that on break a lot. I swear to God, if I hear that fricking "Oh no" song one more fricking time. Ugh. Declaring themselves to be an alpha male or high-value woman or anything like that. It screams immaturity and a total lack of self-awareness. The LinkedIn alternative is declaring yourself as an entrepreneur or thought leader of nothing. Undermining a person every time they try to talk. My ex did this to me and the amount of confidence I lost was terrible. I'm still recovering after 3 years. Teasing someone when they gather guts to talk in a group and then laughing is useless. I can't explain how badly it hurts. Putting an insanely loud exhaust on a crap car and then accelerating to a rev max on a 200-meter stretch of road before having to brake because otherwise you crash into the car in front of you, while listening to some crap hardcore or hardstyle music at a volume otherwise only experienced at festivals. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Posing as being brutally honest, constantly invalidating others isn't cool and speaks of your inability to feel validated by anything other than people. People who say anything they want, insults, slurs, pure meanness, and then when they get called on it say, "It was a joke." I had someone tell me that they'd commit the unspeakable act against me, then try to play that off as a joke. Revving your engines and blasting your crappy music through a city neighborhood regardless of the time. I live in Jersey City and this happens quite often. You don't look cool. Judging people for their music choices, like when someone goes through your iPod or Spotify or whatever and is all, "Ew, you listen to them?" then proceeds to tell you about the super edgy music they listen to that nobody really knows about yet. Driving expensive cars and cutting people off. Your super loud pickup truck with no muffler. We get it, you vape. Wearing name brand clothing just because it has the brand written all over it for everyone else to see. The other day I learned that there are rules to this kind of dressing. For example, Adidas can't be worn with Nike. Apparently hypebeasting is an art and a science. Calling yourselves Alpha or Type A. It's almost like it's a code for massive jerk. Also calling people who agree with them lions and the people who disagree ignorant sheep. I can't take anyone who unironically uses alpha seriously. It's one of those things that if you have to say you are, you probably aren't even close. Having a phone conversation on speakerphone with the volume turned all the way up. God, I hate those people. Being proud of their own ignorance. So to clarify, it's okay to be wrong as long as you're willing to admit it. It's okay to not be naturally intelligent. It's okay to not know everything. What's not okay is being willfully ignorant or stubbornly clinging to patently false information. Yep, the narrator just can't read comment sections anymore. I wonder if I'm just jaded now, but it feels like there's a lot more denial than actual debate happening in response to any given subject on Twitter or X or Threads now. People just hurl insults and leave. Acting like they don't care about anything. Like sure, it was cool in the early 2000s, but now when I see a guy acting like he's too cool to like movies or games or hanging out, it's just so cringy. Like bro, you're not special for saying you don't like anything. And I don't mean introverts like myself who genuinely don't want to do stuff sometimes. I mean the dude who will agree to hang out and then just the whole time is just complaining and saying, "This is so lame." I don't know how this became a thing, but I feel like the weird one when I have actual interests and I like learning about them. But oh no, Mr. Johnny Cool over here immediately acts like I'm the weirdest person ever for enjoying something and taking it seriously. Like what do you do in your free time? Just stare at a wall and try not to be too excited about anything? When people film themselves giving money or food to the homeless, ultimate D-bag, or they just want to brag about it and don't care. People who flaunt or brag about their expensive car, especially the ones whose parents bought it for them. Taking their dogs into large crowds for no good reason, and even though nobody asks, they loudly proclaim that this is their service dog, the jittery, nervous chihuahua that you're holding tight to your chest because it's squirming to get free. The dog with no vest and obviously little to no training. A service dog, sure. Being TikTok famous and listening to music with the speaker on, especially on public transport. Snapback hats with a flat brim and the stupid gold sticker still attached. Blasting music with their windows down. My neighbors were, quote, working on their car, windows down, blasting music and revving the engine. What were they working on? Refilling the fricking wiper fluid reservoir. Smoking in no smoking zones. I saw a truck yesterday with a sticker that said, "My other ride is a redhead." So yeah, I think that person goes top of this list. Cars that make a lot of noise and just need a muffler. Any keyboard warrior who's actually a scaredy cat in real life. Judging people who dress differently to you. Spitting in public or indoors. This happens in my school and it is disgusting. Revving your engine for no reason. Popped up collars on polo shirts. That trend was in more than 20 years ago now, but some guys who peaked in that era just won't let it go. I saw a guy on Judge Judy wearing 2 polo shirts with both collars popped. He was being sued because he was being paid to do IT work for someone, changed the user's name to gay, and refused to change it back. He was definitely still living in the year 2000. People who think consuming certain media makes them a better person. For example, some people think as long as they listen to loud rap music in public, people will think they're cool. Dudes who catcall women or don't have enough class to realize that just because a woman's good-looking and by herself at the moment, that it's okay for them to approach her and start a conversation with comments about her looks. Pet names aren't a good look when you don't know someone either. As a guy, this crap annoys me to no end. You should quit being dogs. When the rims on their car are worth more than the car itself. Acting like virginity is a bad thing, or conversely, that having done the deed makes you a better person. Neither of those are true. Super loud motorcycles disrupting entire communities. Being condescending to waitstaff and other service people. Bragging about their bedroom or love lives. Bragging about their income or material possessions. Being an underachiever, somehow between all of those underdog movies and the trope of smart people being socially inept or wealthy people being morally bankrupt, the public consciousness has somehow shifted to the idea that being below average is something to brag about. I've met people who literally brag about not reading or working out, and that's honestly just sad. Driving around in a lifted truck and/or with political flags flying. I'll grant ya, lifted trucks by themselves aren't a D-bag thing, but every coal-rollin', MAGA flag-flying truck I've seen is lifted. Revving the engine really loud. This is probably the winner of the biggest recurring complaint we have on here, don't you think, folks? There you have it. If you rev, it seems like the vast majority of planet Earth hates you. But you're a D-bag, so no doubt you'll just enjoy the attention. Flicking a cigarette. You're literally littering and sending a small torch out into the world. I already find it a gross habit, but your body, your choice, whatever. I just hate the inherent littering associated with smoking and the nonchalance of the users doing it. Bragging about not having a TV. Great, you're so much more cultured than me. Being a jerk to teachers. I'm just going to go out on a limb here because I could be the only one who thinks this, but selling skinny teas or teddy bear vitamins on media. Okay, the huge metal man-berries that guys hang from the tow hitch on their pickup truck. D-bags. Riding a motorcycle without a helmet. I think you look like a frickin' idiot, and I'm worried about your brains being splattered on my windshield. Diesel trucks rolling coal, which is the practice of modifying your vehicle so it sprays black smoke everywhere. Racing or speeding loudly down a street. Whenever someone goes roaring by, everyone on the sidewalk collectively shakes their heads and says, "Well, that guy's got nothing going on downstairs, like clockwork." Being a former inmate. I've talked to too many people who thought that being arrested and put in prison made them look tough. No, it makes you look dumb. I had a new guy start at the job site, and the first chance we had to loiter and shoot the crap, this brat proudly let us know that he just got out of prison, like it would make him seem hard or exotic or something else. He drove drunk and killed one half of a newlywed couple and still had no regret. He drinks behind his parole officer's back and drives despite losing his license. Always too fast and generally drunk. Everyone I know is just disgusted, especially the guy who had been in a coma for a few weeks due to a drunk driver, and the guy who had a loved one killed by one. I suppose there could be reasons for going to prison that legitimately are badass, like maybe killing someone who attacked a kid or stealing to fund a life-saving medical treatment for a loved one, but most crimes are shameful. I suppose this kid listened to some sort of aggro music that makes it sound like doing time is impressive. I'm not sure what the deal was, as I tried very hard to avoid his company. Trying to act like a manly man. Everyone knows someone like this. Drinks crappy pea water beer because mixed drinks are apparently girly drinks, gets defensive if someone makes a joke towards them, melts down if it's a gay joke, ridicules people for eating rabbit food and insists on their meat and potatoes because they're a man. I could go on, but I think I've set the scene fine. Smoking a cigarette and then just throwing it on the ground when you're done. Littering. I'm not entirely sure the logic behind it, but that gets my vote. I'm assuming that those idiots who throw crap out of their cars or leave all their trash behind while camping or hiking must think they look pretty cool, because they don't care about nature. Rolling coal, new jeans that are pre-ripped, man buns, and those giant watches. Squatted trucks and that stance stuff with tires contacting the pavement at a 45-degree angle. Both make vehicles very unsafe to drive. Disrupting the Zoom meeting so that everyone can feign interest in their cat or dog or whatever pet. Saggy pants. Being an anti-COVID vaxxer. These D-bags on Facebook who post daily about how they're a wolf among sheep. They think they're so much smarter than everyone else because they watched a video on YouTube. Ridiculous superiority complex. Riding my bumper on the highway. We get it, you're so cool that your life and the lives of everyone else on the road don't matter. God forbid you spend 3 more seconds driving slightly behind someone else. What is the weirdest thing that a medical patient flat out denied? I'm a nurse. We had a patient come into the operating room for brain surgery. Probably mid-50s guy with a nice head of light brown hair. Before the patient comes into the actual operating room, we ask them a series of questions, including whether they've had implants, jewelry, non-hospital clothes, stuff like that. The guy says no to all these questions. After the patient gets put to sleep, the surgeon grabbed his hair to start shaving it off because, brain surgery. All his hair peeled off because he was wearing a wig and didn't tell us. We almost shaved his hairpiece because he wouldn't admit to anyone that he wore it. Being perganinant and also having never so much as touched a man. People actually believe women can get preggers in a public pool or so after their parents did the deed in the jacuzzi, and the girl uses the jacuzzi and conceives that way. Anything but admit that they did the deed with someone in front of their parents. I'm not a doctor, but a nurse. I had a patient come in with a toothpick in his member, refused to tell me how it got there, and insisted he was picking his teeth and it just fell in. I admitted a guy for chest pain. As part of the workup, I did a urine substance screen which came back positive for using white snow. After the rest of his cardiac workup was negative, I said to him, "Good news, you didn't have a heart attack. It's likely that your chest pain was caused by using that white snow." His answer was, I didn't use that. See, I was at a party and people had some lines of it out on the table. As I was walking by, an oscillating fan blew it into my face, which is why my pee came back like that. Yeah, got it. I'm a pediatric dentist, and this one throws me for a loop every time, so I'll share it. When I sedate kids, they have to be NPO for 8 hours, so I always ask if they had anything to eat or drink in the morning. Parents never want to admit their kids ate or drank, even when I remind them it's very important, because if they chuck up and aspirate, they could die. Often they try to minimize it and say it was just a few bites, but one kid walked in eating a bag of Cheetos at reception and then the parent insisted to me that they hadn't eaten. Yeah, I'm 100% not sedating your child today. I used to work PR and marketing in an inner-city hospital. I was once hanging out with the ER folks when one of our regulars came in. He had some ongoing issues that often got him hurt. This would have been 2000 or 2001 or so, and I was young, so I'd never even heard of this. The guy had spent hours burying a Phillips head screwdriver in his abdomen, carefully working it around his major organs. He was a Vietnam medic and had some training, so he could feasibly do it. He straight up said, "What screwdriver? You guys are crazy." The attending was staring right at the x-ray and the handle of the screwdriver sticking out of his abdomen. That screwdriver must have been 4 inches long. I still shudder thinking about that. My God, that's scary and honestly really sad if problems of that sort were something of a regular thing with this guy. What do you even do about that? Are you allowed to call in or recommend any sort of intervention? Would that even work? I once had a patient come in with large calluses on the front of his ankles, which is a very unusual place to get calluses. I brought it up a few times because I thought maybe he was wearing his shoe wear improperly, but he kept waving off the question. Eventually, I got him to admit that the calluses were there because he had recently started taking a prescription antidepressant medication, which made it very difficult for him to climax. He found out that if he lay on his living room carpet with his legs bent out beneath him in a W fashion and whacked the mule for several hours, he was finally able to achieve closure. So that's how he got those calluses. Nurse here. Had parents bring their 3-year-old son to the emergency department for 1 month of abdominal pain that just kept getting worse. I ask all the routine questions for this complaint. Lots of questions about his poop. Is it bloody, diarrhea, mucus? When was his last bowel movement? Any changes in the stool? And they deny any other concerning symptoms but abdominal pain. We do blood work, ultrasound, x-ray, everything comes back completely normal, but the kid is intermittently screaming in pain, curled in a ball. Over the next 5 hours, I continue to repeat the same questions. I asked repeatedly if there was anything going on that they could think of. Nope. The kid just doesn't seem well, but we have no reason to keep him. We decide to watch him a little longer and let him eat. The kid eats a bunch. A PB&J, apple juice, crackers, popsicle. No pain, so we decide to send them home. I bring in the discharge paperwork and I'm about to start going over instructions, and the dad goes, "You know, for the past 3 months he's had a lot of worms in his number 2. Worms. Fricking worms. You spent 6 hours denying worms." I literally just turned around and walked out of the room without saying a word. I was laughing almost to the point of tears. I couldn't wait to tell my resident. Deworming medications, a crap ton of wasted time, and they were on their way. I had a patient accuse me of crapping in her bed and threatening to sue me for malpractice. Keynote, she never got out of her bed. Had a patient in hospital, I forget what for. The point is that he disappeared for a few hours. When he came back, he was tachycardic to 160 beats per minute, massive pupils, and wouldn't sit still. We asked him what he'd taken while he was out. Nothing, he swears. He went to the pub and just drank lemonade. Okay, we say, we're going to take some blood and find out what you've taken. He then pipes up and says the friends he was with would probably think it was funny to spike his drink. What, we asked, did he think they might have spiked his drink with? Speed, he says. What do you know, blood confirmed that he had taken speed. But he insists he didn't take it, his drink was spiked. I'm a nurse. I had a kid once who I needed to get a urine sample from. He was 8. I gave him a cup and pointed him to the bathroom. I went to check on my other patients and came back. The kid was still in the bathroom. I go knock on the door. "Hey buddy, you okay in there?" I hear the sink going on full blast. Yep, everything's fine." I go back to his room a few minutes later and he hands me a bag full of water with a cup inside that also appears to be water. I pour the water out of the bag. "Hey buddy, are you sure that this is pee in your cup?" "Yeah, my pee is always clear." The patient is wheeled off for the x-ray. I check the temperature of the so-called pee in the cup. It was, ironically, the same temperature as the water from the faucet. Come on, little homie, you gotta do better than that. Oh, this one is sad. It's from my old roommate. Girl had a very large lump on her chest that she didn't tell the doctors about. She actually went to the hospital for migraines, saying they were getting increasingly bad. When they found the lump, they asked why she didn't say she had that. She said she knew it was going to kill her eventually, but she just wanted to get rid of the migraines because they were giving her a lot of pain in her last months. I guess it's not super weird that this patient wouldn't admit this, but it's weird in the sense that it was super obvious what happened, so he might as well have. I used to do patient registration in the ER. Two of us were wheeling around our computers and registering patients off of ambulances and getting patient information in rooms. A middle-aged guy comes in on an ambulance and my coworker takes it. So I'm finishing up some paperwork and I go to our front office and pull up the patient tracker board so I can see what still needs to be done, and a new patient pops up on the board. Chief complaint: eyeliner pens stuck in his ding-dong. My coworker walks into the office looking scarred. She explained the nurse asked him what happened and he said he slipped. She told him that doesn't seem likely, so he said he had an itch and thought it would help. We later found out from the nurse that he finally admitted that he saw it on TV and thought it would feel good. His 20-something-year-old daughter was with him, but she clearly had some form of developmental disability. It was an all-round sad situation, and I hope someone told him about sounding, and he did some research on safe practices for kinks and that sort of stuff. Apparently, they were both lodged in there pretty badly. People flat out deny when their last meal was. They think they can fool their PET scan, end up losing money, time, and over-irradiated. My God, I feel your frustration to my soul. Sir, have you eaten this morning? Nope, not since before midnight. Meanwhile, I'm looking at a sliver of contracted gallbladder. Are you sure? Because I'd hate for this test to come back incorrect and for you to end up meeting with a surgeon when you don't need to. Well, I might have had a couple of waffles and eggs. That they don't know how to read. I've been taught the trick of handing a paper upside down to them to see if they can read. It's good to know if they don't, so you can make extra sure they have a full understanding of their instructions instead of saying to read the details on the sheet. I can see why they'd not want to reveal that, and it's nice of you just to work out in advance if you have to give a super specific spiel about it, rather than shaming them for concealing this fact about themselves. I'd be a bit concerned about whether someone who can't read will be able to understand the medical terms you throw their way during the spiel, but then again, I guess you can really just break everything right down. Our patient lied about being able to see. We had this lady came into the ER at least once a month, usually for chest pain. She was in her 30s and morbidly obese. She had seen multiple specialists, had her heart, lungs, and GI system examined in almost every conceivable way. One night she comes in with sudden onset blindness. Not her first time with this complaint either. Last time she got a trip to the retina specialist. When I examined her, I walked around her bed and she tells her friend to get her feet off the chair so I could get by. She played it off super cool by adding, "If you have your feet up like you always do." Then came the neuro exam. I have her touch her nose, then touch my finger. Her idea of how a blind person would perform this exam was to touch her nose, then wobble her hand from side to side as she touched the end of my finger. Not to mention the near constant eye contact as we talked. I'd ask a question and start moving while she talked, and she would follow my eye perfectly. She was extremely relieved to find out she had conversion disorder and that her sight would be back soon. Maybe it was a factitious disorder. I tend to believe all her chest pains and crazy complaints were real feelings she was having due to a number of her social and psychological issues. In the ER at midnight, it was a lot easier to tell her it was a symptom of dealing with whatever social drama was happening with her life and that her eyes worked fine, instead of telling her she was lying to me for some gain. Either way, she was sick and needed reassurance. She was genuinely relieved, though. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. This one happened just the other day. Had a patient come in looking pretty sick. Labs and vitals said the guy was in sepsis and most likely had a bad infection. The question was where? After some prodding and letting him know the seriousness of his situation, he finally admitted to the source of his infection. He didn't want to say it, so he just pointed between his legs. Looking underneath his underwear revealed a smelly, red, swollen, pus-straining bag. Some of it was even black and necrotic. Not a pleasant sight, and it looked horribly painful. He went on to explain that he had a painful lump on one of his jewels a few weeks back. He was told it was an infection and given antibiotics. The problem didn't go away, and by then he had decided to take matters into his own hands. Literally. He had tied a string around one and proceeded to cut it out himself. Needless to say, it became horribly infected and was going to require surgical intervention. Luckily, I can tell you he ended up doing okay. Once had a woman come in for a, quote, possible yeast infection. On exam, she had a glass bottle stuck in her hoo-ha filled with urine. Totally wouldn't admit it was hers or explain how it got there even after we removed it. Just kept saying, "I think this is all a prank and you put it up there." Let's see, other than all the random things that end up in rectums accidentally, this drunk electrician with the longest drill bit I've ever seen sticking through both legs and impaling his sack in between like a gross kebab. He was so drunk he thought he broke his hip. Denied owning any drill bits or for that matter having been drinking. Most common are the numerous substance or tox screens we do that come back positive for something, and everyone is shocked and borderline offended if it got into their system. You weren't breathing, we gave you Narcan, you started breathing again, woke up and then denied you used a narcotic. Yeah, alright. Had a patient refused to admit that he swallowed a pen, even though an X-ray showed the pen in his small bowel and we took the pen out during an emergency surgery. I'm a CT tech and I was to scan a woman's abdomen for belly pain. She and her girlfriend were there. I have to have a pregnancy test. I have to have one done. I can't radiate a fetus. I even ask nuns, so no exceptions. She denies up and down that she's pregnant, and then after the test I did, it said she was. She denied it and demanded a blood test, since she was a lesbian and never does the deed with men. Well, the blood test came back positive as well, surprise, and the argument that ensued was biblical. She was arguing with her girlfriend and the nurses and the doctor. I never ended up scanning her, and they chalked up her pain to being pregnant. The look on her girlfriend's face when I said it came back positive was one I'll never forget. So many of you are saying, you shouldn't have told her in front of her significant other, and you're partially right in a way, but the patient had given her that permission, and I didn't question it. Had she not, I would have probably asked her girlfriend to leave the room. You can give anyone you deem necessary access or no access to your medical information. It's not limited to spouses. I volunteer at an ER. Prisoner shoved a ballpoint deep up his ding-dong to get out of being shanked, if I recall correctly. He insisted he had no idea how that got there. We spent hours deliberating how to get it out, and he just reaches down, still in his handcuffs, and pulls it out himself. There was a woman sent in by her family doctor for peeing some blood. We put a camera into her bladder with her awake, looking to exclude a tumor. We found her bladder full of citrus seeds and pits, so many of them. When asked why she put them there, she said, "Well, I eat a lot of fruit," and wouldn't accept any other responsibility for them being there. The going theory was that she put in a straw and pushed them down that. We thought pushing them in one at a time would be a bit scratchy, but we don't know because she never admitted to doing it. Oh, well, thank you for making me read that, as ever. 10 out of 10 would not make my insides hurt just by reading this again. Had an elderly lady from a nursing home come in super altered. She'd wake up briefly to answer questions, but then would be out like a light seconds later. Usually in this case, we assume it's from an infection or stroke, but we still asked about both legal and illicit substance use, since it can cause this kind of thing. The lady claimed several times she'd never taken anything other than prescribed meds. Finally, as we were about to intubate her, put her on a ventilator, since she was getting worse, we cut off her bra and out pops a little baggie with some white powder and a baby straw. We gave her some Narcan and she gasps herself awake. Even after that, it still took her a long time before she said, "Well, maybe I did take some from a friend." Since then, I've trusted nobody when it comes to denying substance use. I'm not saying I think everyone is a substance addict, I'm just saying if you come in acting super out of it, you're probably going to get Narcan just to cover all the bases. I'm an internal medicine resident. Had a patient with sepsis that was being seen by the urology department. When I first read his clinical history, it stated something along the lines of, "Infected wound in the member, patient claims he doesn't know how he got it." So I began my assessment and asked him about his wound. Indeed, he claimed he didn't know how it happened. I decided that the priority was to stabilize the patient and I made some adjustments to antibiotics and other meds. Well, the guy went downhill. The sepsis became severe even though he was on the strongest antibiotics we had and 2 different vasopressors. His blood pressure was through the floor and eventually he needed intubation and went to the ICU. He managed to survive after a complete penectomy, and about 2 weeks later, I saw him again. Turns out the guy was trying to get his dog to lick him down there, and he put some peanut butter on it. Naturally, the dog bit him. He didn't seek medical help for about 2 days before the pain and fever was too much. If we knew from the beginning that the wound was inflicted that way, the antibiotic would have been different and probably would have made a difference. I feel sorry for the guy, but with a wound like that, he's lucky to be alive. I'm a nurse, not a doctor, but it's amazing how many patients lie about how much they drink. Dude, we aren't judging you. We just want to know if we need to worry about you detoxing when you come out of an open heart surgery. A lot of the comments in here seem to be about your personal doctor visits. My comment was very specifically referring to major surgery. All I'm saying is this. If you're going to land in the hospital for a significant amount of time and you're an alcoholic, it's to your benefit and safety to be honest about that, because the odds that you'll be withdrawn in your time there is high. If providers know that, they can plan to manage that so you don't withdraw. Last, sounds like a lot of you have run into crappy, judgy people in healthcare. We aren't all like that, and even the judgy ones really don't want you to detox on their shift. I can literally smell the smoke on your clothes and breath, see the nicotine stains on your fingers, and you're trying to tell me you quit smoking 10 years ago? I had a patient on our service for a heart failure exacerbation. We weren't sure why she had one now if she'd been stable for a few years prior. She also had a documented past use of smack, so we checked a urine substance screen. The screen was positive, and the next day I rounded on her. She asked me why she had the exacerbation. I told her that it was likely due to her smack use. She was shocked that I would accuse her of using. I brought up her positive test, and she insisted it was a false positive and told me she must have picked up the false positive from a toilet seat. That's not how any of that works. Not a doctor, but my husband. He had a 17-year-old girl with abdominal pains come into the ER with her mum. Turns out she's in full-blown labor. She assures everyone that she can't be pregnant, she's a virgin. The baby is literally crowning right there in ER. No maternity ward was in their hospital, and she was in advanced labor when she arrived. She still insisted she was a virgin. My mum is a nurse and told me about the time some lady came in for abdominal pains as well. Yep, she was pregnant and gave birth, and as soon as the baby was out, she screamed, "It's not mine!" Mom responded with, "Well, it didn't come out of me." My patient presented over several months with recurrent huge abscesses that we couldn't explain. She was in horrible pain, had to stop working. We tested for everything. Eventually, her husband called me to say that he found syringes in her medical cabinet. We think she was injecting herself with fecal matter. When the syringes were found, she stopped coming into her appointments. To those asking why, I think she has Munchausen syndrome. She wanted the attention from being sick. I started getting suspicious when she'd always get a new abscess before any court dates, for her child protection services problems, and needed a doctor's note to get out of the court date. She denies everything, and it's very hard to have someone committed unless they're regularly attempting to Control-Alt-Delete on their life. Worked in a hospital for a long time, had a patient come in who'd taken way too much smack. I was able to get him set on that front. However, he had necrotizing fasciitis in his pectoral from injecting there. He was septic and honestly a bit of a jerk. He kept trying to tell us the reason he was there was because of a motorcycle accident. We all knew, but he was in absolute denial. He eventually healed up and transferred out after a couple of months. He came back about 6 months later to say thank you to all of us and to apologize for all the lies and behavior. It seems it was enough to get him out of that life and onto a new one. I think about him now and then, and I hope he stayed clean. When I was a medical student, we had a patient on one of my rotations that was getting oral pain meds, but insisting that we switch them to a stronger IV pain medicine because they'd been getting nauseous and throwing up all of their meds. When our team rounded on the patient to check on them, we walked into the room and were quickly greeted by an eager patient that had been waiting to show us the bag they'd been throwing up in. Turns out that it was filled with a lovely mixture of number 1 and 2 and topped off with a handful of pills the patient had thrown in there to make it look like they couldn't keep the meds down. When we called them out, the patient was in total denial and tried to reason with us that it must be throw-up since it's in the throw-up bag. When did a clueless adult make you say, "How the hell do you not know that?" My mum can't remember whether blue or red is associated with hot or cold. When she's in the car and wants to turn on the AC, she just randomly sets the dial to one side or the other and waits for the air to come on to see whether she's right or not. I've met more than one person who just doesn't get fire alarms. When my husband and I first got an apartment together, we were cooking and we burned something. The smoke caused the smoke alarm to start beeping. Instead of opening the window to let the smoke out like a normal person, he calmly walked to the door and began putting on his shoes to go outside and wait for the fire department to come, because he thought that when the smoke alarm goes off, that's what you do. After all, why else would we have gone through all those fire drills in elementary school? My grandmother is 88 years old, drives a Ford Mustang, doesn't know how to put gas in her car, has literally driven cars for 70 years without ever once using a gas pump. She calls me every few weeks to go over there and follow her to the gas station so I can pump for her. I don't have the heart to tell her that the employees will do it if she asks nicely, since it's one of the few occasions where I see her. My college roommate asked me how to make a sandwich, like how to actually put mayonnaise on the bread and slice a tomato. He was 22 and had been recently accepted to medical school. God help us. Context: I've been living with this girl for several months. When we were out this weekend, she wanted to take a cab home, but we were all so broke, so we took public transportation, and she took a cab with another friend of ours. When we got off the bus, 3 blocks from the apartment, we ran into our friend. He told me the following story. She gave the cab driver the wrong directions. They got to the apartment without her directions, but she didn't have her keys. She had no idea how to ring the bell to the apartment. Someone held the door for her, but she refused to go in because she thought she'd be stuck. My friend realized he was expected to help her. She never considered calling any of the other 5 of us who lived there, and now she's upset because we didn't know she didn't have her keys and won't speak to us. In short, one of our friends got lost on the way back to an apartment she's lived in for months, was locked out, and had no idea how to get in. Wow. I mean, every now and then you meet a person who you wonder how they figured out things like breathing, and it sounds like your roomie is just one such specimen. Ooh, I am all over this one. I had an old roommate and boyfriend who was very sheltered when it came to basic life stuff. Here are some highlights. First, there was laundry. He had never done it, ever. When he moved in, all of his clothes were filthy because his parents hadn't visited in 6 months or so, and so nothing had been washed since then. I had to show him how a washer-dryer worked. Then there was the cooking. He could only use a microwave. Making ramen on a stove was a mystery. More than once I saw him crunching his way through a half-cooked packet because he didn't get the water past warm. And third were the bananas. This is my absolute favorite. I came home with fruit. His parents were also not good with encouraging a healthy diet. I handed him a banana. He bit into the skin, looked confused, saw me looking at him oddly, and I had to show a 21-year-old man how to open a banana. He had eaten them many times before and had never been shown or asked to peel his own. In short, American adult male had never peeled a banana. Some parents don't teach that stuff. How are you going to learn if you never got to do something? Except the banana thing. What the frick? My girlfriend in college didn't know how to boil water. I explained how easy it was. Water goes in the pot, pot goes on the stove, turn on the stove. She did it, then left the pot there for hours, waiting for the water to, quote, finish boiling. Of course, all of the water evaporated, she completely burned the crap out of the pot, and then started to panic and cry because she didn't know how to turn the stove off. I am no longer with this girl. Well, here's one that's a little different. My dad's college roommate was in town a few weeks back, so my dad and I went to meet him, grab a beer, and shoot the crap. While we were hanging out, they did a little reminiscing, and they mentioned the roommate's girlfriend from freshman year. Apparently, this girl had watched a few too many musicals and actually genuinely thought that people in relationships would actually sing to each other. They went on one date and it was fine. The second date was okay, but the girl seemed a bit distant at the end. He went on a third date and she asked, "Why don't you ever sing to me?" His response was along the lines of, "Why the frick would I be singing?" She complained that if he really liked her, he'd just sing to her, or at least try. There didn't have to be any dancing, just singing. He thought she was joking, so he made a sarcastic comment about how stupid that was. She didn't appreciate it. My dad and his roommate were convinced that she was joking and just messing with him. The roommate even went over to her room, and the girl's roommate wouldn't let him in to see her because she was so heartbroken. A few weeks later, the girl's roommate apologized because she didn't realize how crazy the reason for the breakup had been. In short, why the frick would you demand anyone just burst into song? In high school, there was one time I was going to give a friend a ride home after a band practice or something, since somebody hadn't come to pick him up, and he said it was going to be a long while. He told me which direction to start in, but as we continued driving, it became clear that he actually didn't know where he lived. He didn't know the address or how to get there from the school he goes to every weekday. He tried giving terrible directions like, "It's near the flashing yellow lights," during the drive. I couldn't believe that this high school sophomore actually had no idea where he lived. I had to end up just taking him back to the school so his mum could pick him up. I'm not sure if it fits, but several years ago in a game of Scrabble I tried to play CLIT. Classy, I know, and a 23-year-old girl asked, "What's that?" She had been raised pretty conservatively. Not my story, but my sister's. She was a residential advisor for first years in college. She smelled smoke in the common room and found out that a girl had put a bowl with foil in the microwave and it was on fire. She put the fire out. The girl came out and said it was her food and she thought foil would make it heat faster in the microwave. Well, she wasn't wrong. I met a woman in a parking garage that didn't know that her key could unlock the door. She flagged me down to ask if I could give her a ride to get a battery for the key fob that unlocked the door so she could get into her car. When I was younger, I dated a 19-year-old guy that didn't know how to use a steak knife. Instead of sawing the meat, he attempted to force the knife through it by simply pushing down. I don't know if you don't know this, dude, but steak is not quite the same consistency as softened butter. He kept shaking the entire table. We were in a restaurant, and he tried to force the knife into the meat. Eventually, I stopped him, took his knife and showed him how to saw the meat. His mind was completely blown. When I asked him how the F it was possible that he didn't know how to do this, he told me, "Oh, my parents usually just let me pick up the meat in my hands at home." We broke up a couple of months later. I went on a date with a girl back in my ultra-conservative Christian university and she had a menstrual incident. She wasn't just embarrassed but genuinely indescribably afraid that she was going to bleed to death, quote, "this time." I ran into a store, bought her some replacement jeans and tampons and acted as nonchalant as I could. I have a gift in that I truly lack the ability to give a judgmental F about people in moments like these. I'm just very clinical about things, so people quickly get over being embarrassed in front of me. So I was able to get to the bottom of this little mishap. Turns out through the years of being raised in a religious, euphemism-laden information vacuum, she'd somehow associated that time of month with her feelings of liking a boy who God disapproved of. To her mind, the blood was there to discourage any bedroom activity and to punish her. She also didn't know enough about feminine hygiene products to know how to use them, so she'd been using stacks of tissues for years. She couldn't even conceive of the idea of tampons. In her mind, she'd consented to go to dinner and the movies with me knowing she was risking God's wrath. I found that very touching. Also, she thought our school's policy of separate swim times for women and men was because women could get pregnant swimming in the same water as men while wearing swimsuits. No, she wasn't stupid. 4.0 GPA, 3/4 of a ride scholarship, business and accounting major. She was just so sheltered. This was in 1991. And as usual, parentally forced hardcore religion is the bad guy. I just feel sad for anyone growing up feeling that their natural urges make them evil and wrong in any way. And going so long without the same convenient sanitary products as basically everyone else because your parents won't have to talk with you is just so unfair. My 23-year-old friend just learned how to do the dishes and laundry this weekend. I'm kinda proud of them. Sweeping and mopping. We had a lot of community service workers and volunteers who had no idea what to do. My roommate of 3 months now has astounded me with the inane things she just doesn't seem to grasp. For example, she saw me making a cheeseburger and promptly explained, "That's how you melt cheese on it?" or something to that effect. She put a lid on something in the microwave and the handle started to smoke and melt because she didn't think that there might be a screw holding the thing together. She follows directions on mostly cooked food, like ready rice, frozen veggies and stuff, to the letter and then doesn't understand that there might be any number of discrepancies between our appliance and the instructions, then complains that her food never cooks, and eats it anyway. Also, she can't seem to wrap her head around turning her light off when she goes to sleep and not running up the power bill, taking a half-hour-long shower in the morning while 3 other people are getting ready for the day, and insisting that her word is infallible. She's a child. I'd like to get her to move out, and this is the first place I've been able to vent about it. Happy first comment to me. Oh my god, that food thing is so funny. The roommate's like, "The pizza's still cold in the middle, I don't know why. It said to heat it for 2 minutes. Just put it in longer." It said 2 minutes. Scarfs down half-frozen pizza while glaring at you. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. How to wash your face. I think most people dating back to early humans have figured out the cup your hands under running water, lean your head over the sink, and bring your hands up to your face process. I lived with an adult girl who did not know how to do this. She'd just swat the frickin' water up at her face, get the sink, counter, and mirror, the toilet, frickin' everything soaking wet. That's how they do it in the commercials. That's how I did it at first, because that's how I saw it in commercials. After the first couple of times, I was like, I'm making a huge mess here. Better tone it down a bit. Now I just wash my face in the shower. A friend of a friend is a 20-year-old girl who doesn't know how and refuses to pump her own gas. She also refuses to be taught. She practically refuses to drive herself anywhere. For example, she lives now in a city about 2 or 3 hours away and will only ride with someone else. While traveling to a closer city, roughly an hour away, she does the same thing, to the point she missed seeing her current love interest because there was nobody to drive her. Why? It sounds like she's deathly afraid of driving as a whole and just uses this as an excuse. Unfortunately, I'd thought about that too, and I did ask her. However, she'll drive herself to work and school and home fine. She just has a princess attitude towards her life, i.e. that her ideal husband will make lots of money, she won't have to work or do anything except whatever the F she wants, but stand there and look pretty. Her words mainly, not mine. I'm a senior in college and I still find myself shaking my head when my classmates don't know how to use the campus bus routes to get back home. They're afraid they'll get lost and end up at rock bottom or something like that. A friend of mine tried to cook rice in the kettle because she understood it involved heat and water. That was her logical conclusion. She's 27. My brother is 16. He can't ride a bike or tie shoelaces or make food more complicated than switching on an oven or kettle. I'm concerned about not being able to tie his shoelaces. My girlfriend went 1,500 miles without getting an oil change. She thought you only bring your car in when there's a problem. My aunt went 30,000 miles with no oil change, then got mad when the dealership refused to give her a new engine because of it. I recently had to explain to someone in their 20s what transmitted diseases are. The person had no idea. I haven't truly parallel parked since the day I passed my driver's test. I avoid it like the plague. I'll even stop the car and make my friend's Chinese fire drill so someone else can park it for me. I understand the mechanics of how to do it, but I'm blind in one eye and it affects my depth perception enough to make me uncomfortable doing it. By refusing to learn, I promise I'm just looking out for the well-being of all of your vehicles. I was a class acquaintance of a pretty popular girl in my grade, so one day sitting at the popular table, kind of a big deal for me as a nerdy guy with this girl, I learned that she didn't know how to use a knife and cut up her lunch, and her lackey friend kind of did it for her as her mum did when she was home. What the frick? She was like 14. My current roommate has no idea how to shop for groceries or manage the food he's already bought. Now we live about a 3-minute walk from a pretty large grocery store, so food shopping is by no means inconvenient. His food is constantly rotting in the fridge. When he orders out, he leaves the leftovers there until they have to be thrown away. He currently has 3 half-eaten bags of chips of the same brand and flavor. He probably ends up throwing away about $100 worth of food every month. Giving tips. My friends are sweet and they do tip, but figuring out 10 or 20% is like rocket science to them. Move the decimal over, boom, 10%. You need 20%, double that crap. My car's battery was getting old and had started to die when I would park it to go to class. I come out of class one day and tried to start my car, and of course it won't start. I was cussing at it a bit and decided to wait until the person parked next to me shows up. It doesn't take long for this girl, fairly attractive, to show up and lock the new Lexus SUV right next to me. I politely ask her if she can give me a jump. She agrees as long as it doesn't hurt her car and asks me what she needs to do. I tell her all I need to do is for her to pop her hood for now and then start it when I say to. She looks at me for a second and then says, "How do I pop the hood?" Look, I don't judge. New car for her probably, and she hasn't experimented to figure it out. I open her hood for her, showing her exactly how to do it so she knows. Then hook up my jumper cables, also explaining what I'm doing. I then tell her to start her car, and she does. My car starts up fine. I tell her that that's all there is, and she can close her hood when she responds with, "Okay, but how do I do that?" Okay, well, you know what? She seems nice and you taught her 1 or 2 things about her car that day, so let's leave this poor sweet person alone and hope that university drastically broadens her general life education. A 21-year-old woman at work has 2 kids by 2 different men and her grandmother has adopted them. Said woman found out this week she's pregnant with her 3rd kid from another guy. I think 21 is old enough to know that if you've made 2 kids that somebody else has to raise, it's time to stop. I was on a backpacking trip with my 15-year-old brother and my dad this summer, and we had just finished dinner. My dad had gone down to the lake to fish, but since I'm a wimp, I decided to make some instant cheesecake instead. My brother followed suit. I looked at the instructions, which said something like, 1. Add water. 2. Beat for 2 minutes. 3. Enjoy. So I added the water and started beating the mix, as in stirring it vigorously with a spoon. I looked over and saw my little brother holding his bag with one hand and just repeatedly punching it with the other, instant dessert flying everywhere. We had a little chat. That day he learned that violence was not always the answer. I was asking my chemistry teacher about something in high school, junior year, a few years back, and a girl was behind me with her student notebook out. I knew she probably wanted to go to the bathroom, so I told her to go ahead, and she gave her notebook to the teacher to sign her a hall pass, but he handed it back because it was blank and asked her to write the date and time. She turned around and stared at the clock, which was analog, for about 10 seconds and said, "I can't tell time." I learned lefty-loosey, righty-tighty from Barney's father in How I Met Your Mother. This feels like something I should have been taught as a kid. It is. You should yell at your parents. I had an ex-girlfriend that still couldn't figure out how to open or close blinds. She was 23. Okay, reading everyone else's answers has been great. I just learned that I'm better in life skills than a lot of people. This is my first story ever, but my story is too ridiculous not to share. So my husband and I were living with his parents for a while after he lost his job, and his 30-year-old sister was also living there while she finished nursing school and whatnot. She was an abhorrently messy person, and I had the pleasure of sharing a bathroom with her. Now, she always had an extremely heavy period, so that time of the month was a literal bloodbath everywhere. One morning I woke up for work, sleepy-eyed and grumpy, walked to the bathroom and sat down on the loo. As I was sitting there, I noticed drops of blood all over the bathroom floor. Then I glanced over to the wastebasket and noticed it was overflowing with unwrapped, bloody, disgusting pads, and they were spilling out everywhere. I was so angry because I've yelled at her for this once before. I get up to grab the Clorox wipes, and then I see that I've also sat in the blood that she left on the toilet. Mind you, I'm very sleepy and hardly had the time to come to my senses yet. I shrieked, and then I saw that I'd also stepped in it as well, because there were drops of blood on the bath mat that I didn't see, and I'd tracked it all over the fricking house. I started screaming at her from the bathroom to come clean up the fricking murder scene and to take more care of the way she leaves the bathroom. And do you know what she says? "I don't need you telling me what to do." Excuse me? You're 30 frickin' years old. I can't believe I have to tell you this in the first place. You've had your period for 15 or so years and you still don't know how to wrap up a pad or wipe down a loo? And you're going to be a nurse? Are you kidding me? How to dress. Surprised by how many fellow college students show up to interviews and career fairs dressed like they're going out on a Friday night and wondering how come they didn't get called back. Roommate once asked where the stamp goes on the letter that he was sending. Anyone over the age of 18 who doesn't know how to cook for themselves. One of my former roommates, who was 23 at the time, said he'd like some popcorn while we were watching a movie. I told him I had some in the cupboard and to help himself. He grabs the popcorn, takes the cellophane off, then sheepishly walks into the room and goes, How do I do this? 23 years old, didn't know how to microwave his own popcorn. This is going to sound odd, but properly clean up the spill of a liquid such as soda, coffee, or tea. Way too many times I see someone lay down some paper towels, stomp on them, and call it clean. No. Cleaning up sticky messes is an art. First, blot but don't wipe it all up with paper towels. Next, grab a washcloth with warm water on it and wipe towards the center of the mess. You do not want to spread it outwards. Repeat. Then add a little spray cleaner to the party. If it spills near a wall, a table or chairs, wipe them too. Then one more pass over with just warm water on a washcloth, then dry. That's how you clean up a spill. You are 70 years old. I refuse to believe that you do not yet understand the concept of promptly paying for your purchases. That's been the name of the game for over 20 years now. I still tie my girlfriend's shoelaces for her. She's picked it up now, almost, but she was never taught as a kid because her parents were never around. In college, one of my roommates came into the living room and asked me what a cookie sheet was and do we have one. I'm surprised how many people I knew back in high school and early college who were too nervous to call and order a pizza for delivery because they'd never done it before. I worked in a medical office and there were people in their 30s and upwards who didn't know anything about their medical insurance. Oh, I have copay? Why yes, it is that dollar amount on the front of your insurance card, sir. Anything else? What absolute shenanigans did your goofy dad get up to? I am a Bengali, and as all good Bengalis, we went to see tigers in the north of Bengal. Spoiler alert, no tigers. After one pretty disappointing day of missing 2 elephant herds and seeing no wild cats, much less a tiger, we stop at a dried-up riverbed. We're freaking tired, the sun is setting, the peacocks are screaming, the usual where we're from. Suddenly, we hear a growl. Monkeys are going nuts, the telltale signs of a tiger nearby. The guide tells us to rush to our jeeps. We oblige, but just before boarding, I see my dad smirking hard. After an hour of waiting, we see no tigers and we head home. The next morning, while everyone is freaking out over the growl, Dad pulls me aside and says it was a burp. A freaking burp. So I can proudly say that once my dad burped so hard that the jungle thought it was a tiger. One time, my dad waited till my 3 siblings and I had gone to bed on Christmas Eve. Then he shouted, "I don't care who you are, fat man, get that sled off my roof." We were all up and telling Dad not to yell at Santa. My dad was a fireman and picked me up from school in a fire engine once. My dad was also a fireman and we kind of took it for granted. All of the other kids thought it was awesome, but we were just used to it, I suppose. He treated it like a job and we did too. Until we went on family vacation and saw a vehicle overturn ahead of us in a terrible accident. Watching my father spring into action and quickly take control and begin rescuing the family made me look at him in an entirely different way. Afterwards, he got in our car and we continued our vacation. He said, "I think they're going to be alright." And that was that, but we knew Dad was a total badass. One day, my dad answered the door in his underwear at 8 a.m. The salesman was obviously weirded out. After he left, my mum was mortified and asked why he did that. My dad said, "If these people don't want a show, they shouldn't have come for the matinee." One time we went to Universal Studios and my dad took me on the Hulk roller coaster even though he knew it would make him sick. I was afraid of roller coasters at that point and he sacrificed himself because he knew I'd never go on a ride without him. When we got off, his face was completely colorless and his stomach was done working correctly for the rest of the day. But I loved the roller coaster. When I was walking out to the car to leave for college, my dad yelled, "Hey!" from the front door, and I turned around. He takes out this huge box of magnum-sized rubbers and throws them at me as hard as he can. They hit me in the nose and he yells, "Care package," and then ran inside laughing. That's very flattering, Dad, but I don't think I'll have much use for them. There are some questions that I feel have to follow up, like, do you not have much use for them because you're not interested, or female, or because you have a teeny tiny ding-a-ling? And if it's the latter, don't worry, you can just drop them on the ground in front of your crush, along with a $100 note and loudly proclaim that you dropped them to demonstrate value. I didn't see my dad much. He lived 80 miles away and was getting his life together. I tried to see him once a month for a weekend. I'd bring my homework and spend a few days with him. I was sitting at his computer while he was watching TV in the same room, and he turns to me and asks if I want to see something. He retrieves a cardboard box from his closet and sets it on my lap, and I open it. Staring at me in the face is a 15-inch, giant, girthy, purple marital aid. I look up to him with a confused expression, and he laughs out with a Cheshire grin. I'm going to make a lamp out of it. We laugh about it for the rest of the weekend, making dumb jokes. It was fun. But soon I leave for home and I forget about the jokes and the toy. So I return a month later, open the door to his apartment to see all of the walls had a faint purple hue. Looking down, I see this giant glowing purple Johnson suction-cupped to my dad's coffee table. I dropped my bags, slack-jawed as he steps up behind me and claps twice, and the lamps turn off. My dad had made a manhood-shaped lamp and then given it the clap. One time, my older brother and I were helping my dad cut down some trees in the backyard, and the chainsaw kind of stuck and my dad yanked it out a little too hard and hit my brother's leg. We all froze and looked at his jeans, which had 4 or so perfectly spaced holes, but no blood. He had managed to hit my brother's pants, but didn't get in far enough to hit flesh. The next words out of his mouth were pretty obvious. "Don't tell your mother." And we still haven't 20 years later. One time, just before I graduated high school, my dad sat me down to have a serious conversation about socializing in college. It turned into him telling me a bunch of crazy party stories and suggesting that the best way to make friends is to own a blender with a 100-foot extension cord, because his friends would go outside to play basketball or whatever, and he'd bring his blender out with them and make margaritas. We met so many girls because of that blender. People like the guy with the blender. My dad is a super serious and straight-laced man most of the time, and it totally caught me off guard. One time, I asked my dad to rent The Notebook for me from the good old family video up the street, and he rented Nacho Libre because he could only remember it started with an N. One time, my dad literally took candy from a baby. A 2-year-old held up a lollipop, and my dad assumed the kid was giving it to him. After taking it and walking away, he realized that the toddler was probably just wanting to show it to him. At least that's what he told us. Maybe my dad just wanted an excuse to take the candy. One time, my dad took my brother's walkie-talkie and had us and about 10 kids in the neighborhood convinced that we'd picked up a signal from a plane that was crashing towards the earth. We were running up and down the streets for an hour with our eyes on the sky listening as the pilot tried to reach someone for help. Dad's windows were open, so we eventually caught on to the heinous laughter echoing between the houses after every Mayday. So Michigan doesn't allow the good sort of fireworks, but Indiana does. So every June, my dad would drive across the border and pick up a trunkful. One rather inebriated 4th of July, he reached in the back, pulled out what appeared to be an oversized confetti popper, and aimed it at the tree before pulling the trigger. It was not a party popper, it was his emergency flare. It got stuck towards the top of the tree and turned the whole neighborhood orange. The cops in my hometown wouldn't really turn out for reports of the good fireworks unless someone lit a car on fire or something, but they will definitely turn out en masse for an emergency flare. Dad went from drunk to drill sergeant in about 2 seconds. Somehow we managed to shove the entire stock of the good fireworks into the garage and used snow shovels to push the husks of the used ones into the parking lot across the street. When the 3 police cars and the fire and rescue truck showed up, us kids were playing with sparklers and Dad was standing with his hands on his hips, scowling at the tree. Why yes, officer, some punks were across the street lighting off Roman candles and huge fountains, and then they just ran off when one of their tricks got stuck in a tree. He was just about to call when they ran off. Don't they know that Roman candles are dangerous? They could have hit one of the kids. About 5 years ago, my dad accidentally cut 3 of his fingers off in our garage with a saw. My niece was only like 5 months old at the time, so growing up, she's never seen my dad with all of his digits. Anyway, when she was about 2.5, she noticed that one of his hands was different. So, one day she asked him, "Grandpappy, what happened to your fingers?" My dad looked down at his hand, all shocked, and said, "Someone stole them!" Her face had the look of pure horror, and she screamed, "Who stole your fingers?" My dad looked at my mum and said, "Grandmummy stole them." My niece ran up to my mum and started beating on her legs, searching her jean pockets to give her back Grandpappy's fingers. My dad, ladies and gentlemen. One time, my dad was sitting on the couch in our living room. Mum brought out a bag of sugar and asked him to open it. He opened it like it was a bag of Doritos, and I mean, it was everywhere. He was only wearing his shorts, so there was sugar in just about every square inch of his visible hair, as well as all over our carpet and couch. Took him 4 showers in a row to get it all off. This is the only feasible way for the narrator to ever be a sugar daddy to someone. Also, bags of sugar aren't hard to open. They're not even in plastic packaging most of the time. What was going on here? One time, my dad made me drive 3 hours from home to visit a nature preserve. He then began taking pictures of the birds there. Just one problem, the birds were plastic. Turns out the flocks had stopped migrating back to the preserve, so they put up plastic birds for tourists. The funniest part was how long it took him to listen to me telling him they were plastic. When I was 17, my crush arrived to pick me up to go hang out. He didn't come to the front door, he just honked from the driveway. So my dad got a bit mad at him. That's not how you treat a lady. Honking is unacceptable. And he didn't let me go out. He brought up that scenario repeatedly for years as a baseline for how my dates should treat me. He hated that guy. I got married a few years later, and my husband died a few years into our relationship. A few years after he died, I was joking with my dad about the guy honking his horn, and my dad looks at me and says, "Wait, that was the same guy?" Yes, Dad, that was the same guy. He'd never realized that I'd married the honking guy. I didn't know that he didn't know. My kids love that story, it's pretty hilarious. When the new Star Wars movies came out, we were in elementary school. My dad's company had booked the whole theater to see it on opening day, so we got to leave school early to see it. My dad dressed up as Darth Vader, full costume with helmet and lightsaber, and snuck into our classroom and came up behind us saying, "Jimmy, I am your father. At the time, I don't think it was possible to be more embarrassed, but now I think it's pretty hilarious of my dad to do that. Me and a few of my friends used to hold poker nights each week, which my dad used to play too. He got particularly drunk one night and was getting on his bicycle to go home. It was icy outside and we spent around 15 minutes trying to persuade him to have a lift from one of my friends. He refused. 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the front door and there he is with blood dripping down and covering half his face. All he said was, "I fell over." He then came in and fell over again, washed his face and went to sleep on the couch. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. One time, my dad crapped his jeans on the side of the road on the way to my volleyball tournament. We were running late for the tournament, so he threw the pants in the woods, had dress pants in the car. He walked around the tournament all day in a red volleyball sweatshirt and pinstripe dress pants. One time, when I was younger and embarrassed about my body and potential dirty words, my dad made up a song about ding-dongs and ladybits and sung it any opportunity he could just to embarrass me. One time, my dad was on a business trip and he ended up getting upgraded to first class. He ended up talking with this guy seated near him for a majority of the flight. Turned out that guy was Usher. One time, my dad made a remote control car and put me as a toddler on it and drove me around. One time, my dad was riding his bike on a 3-foot-tall brick wall, slipped off, hit his head on it, and got knocked out behind it for an hour or so. My grandma almost called the cops to file him missing. He also tried to see how far he could pee into a urinal, apparently about 10 feet before he got caught by a teacher walking into the bathroom. He also dared his best friend to throw a full milk carton at a teacher. His friend did it. That teacher was also my grandma's best friend at the time. Him and my uncle were throwing snowballs at cars passing on the highway. They hit an undercover detective. They ran back to the house, and while my aunt didn't show, they snuck back in and she had to talk to the detective. He also stole my aunt's VW Beetle and took it for a midnight joyride. They stuck it in a ditch and had a farmer pull it out with a tractor. She just found out last year, nearly 40 years later. He really likes car horns. When we were kids, he held down the horn on a country road until the horn gave out and was just squeaking, trying to make a noise. He recently got a new aerating trailer for his lawnmower, and he was so excited about it that he did 3 of our neighbors' yards for fun. He also got himself a Christmas present a few years back and yelled, "Yes, thank you," when he opened it. That same Christmas, my mum got him a new coffee maker, and he spent the entire night setting it up and making everyone coffee. He bought a motorcycle as a midlife crisis thing. He kept it a secret from my grandma for 3 years. A 50-year-old man hiding things from his mum. My older brother fired an arrow almost straight up in the air. It came back down right on the peak of our shed, sticking straight up and dead center. You could tell my old man was trying not to laugh while scolding us. We were having a bonfire one night and one of my brother's friends put a Mountain Dew can near the fire so it heated up slowly. When it exploded, it sounded like a mortar went off. It sent embers 40 feet into the air and 25 feet around. After regaining our senses, we could see our dad's silhouette sprinting inside the house because he thought we were getting shot at. I've never seen him move that fast. To clarify, he was already in the house, running out. Well, that's better, but nowhere near as funny as the idea of him bailing on his entire family to get to safety. Every man for himself. Best of luck, kiddos. One time, my dad saw me put a rubber band around the sink's small water hose thing that I'd specifically set up for him. But instead of saying anything, he just left it there and watched for the next victim. He laughed so hard when the older man we rented the basement to yelled out, "What the frick?" and returned with his shirt all wet. One time, I was in another room and the phone rang. I heard my dad answer the phone when a telemarketer called and they asked if he wanted his ductwork cleaned. He said, "Yes, I'd love to have my ducts cleaned. Quack, 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 quack," and then just hung up on the guy. My dad told a telemarketer to F off once. The telemarketer called back, listed our address, and threatened to murder the whole family. The police escorted me home from school that day. One time, my dad almost ended me because he thought I was a burglar. I'd snuck downstairs for some reason. I was in the kitchen and heard him coming in, so I hid behind the kitchen counter. Heard my dad opening drawers and things. The next thing I know, he had leaned over the counter and grabbed my head and had a kitchen knife to my throat. A split second later, he realized it was me and dropped me. Then I got yelled at because he had heard me breathing. He thought I was a home intruder and I almost got into a world of pain. He was shaking from the adrenaline. As a dad now myself, I can imagine the state of mind he was in. My dad once put off going to the optometrist for 3 years. When he finally went, it turned out his right eye was in charge of looking at things far away, and his left eye only looked at things close up. Sometime during those 3 years, he became farsighted and his brain compensated. One time, my dad went to my school event in jeans, a jean shirt, and jean jacket, also known as a Canadian tuxedo. When I was a child, around 8 or 9 years old, my parents and I were vacationing in Las Vegas, staying at the MGM Grand. Downstairs in the hotel were shops and restaurants, and I had to use the bathroom. I went into the store, did my business, and then to my childlike horror, I discovered the door was stuck. The door was the type close to the floor, and there wasn't room to crawl out. I yelled for my dad, who was using the urinal, and he walks over, grabs the door, and literally yanks it off its hinges, like it was nothing. Sets the door against the wall, and we just walk out. I'll never forget it. In short, Dad ripped a stall door off the hinges because I was trapped inside. One time, my dad set someone on fire. He was standing with a group of people having a smoke. This girl walked up and asked for a light. My dad said sure. She leant in and he lit the lighter, and her hair went right into the flame, causing her hair to catch on fire. Apparently someone had a little too much hairspray. She was fine and didn't suffer any serious injuries. Dad still tells people the story to this day. One time, my dad ripped a humongous toot and killed all of the power in the neighborhood. Literally, dark. Of course, we later found out that somebody had hit a pole further up the line at that exact moment. It made perfect sense to us as kids. Dad's an electrician and has deadly gas. Therefore, dark. Now I use this as an example that correlation is not causation. One time, my dad's pub in Africa was held up by 2 guys with firearms. They ran in, brandishing weapons, and one held his to my dad's head and demanded money. Everyone in the place froze up, scared that they'd somehow wind these guys up and they'd kill someone. My dad turned his head to look at the guy who had the weapon to his head and saw the little orange water nozzle at the end of the gun. So he ripped it out of the guy's hands and beat the crap out of him. The night watchman and security showed up and grabbed the other guy, who tried to make a run for it, and handed his butt to him as well. In short, my dad's African pub was held up by 2 guys with water pistols, so he and security beat the crap out of the would-be robbers. One time, my dad lodged a huge splinter under his fingernail. He has huge hands, and the splinter entered under his middle finger, and the tip of the splinter was poking out of his knuckle. He fell to the ground and calmly asked for needle-nose pliers. After I handed the pliers to him, he yanked the splinter out and went back to work. Hardcore as F. One time, my dad cut his leg pretty bad, so he tore my mum's shirt off, wrapped his wound, and she drove him to the hospital. He also puts coffee in his oatmeal to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. One time, my dad called the phone at my work and asked me where I was and what I was doing. This is a dark story, but I still want to tell it because it really means something to me. After my mum and dad got married, my dad would often come home very late at night, very drunk. Almost every night, he'd be too drunk to function. My dad never thought twice about his alcoholism until my mother went into labor for the first time, and he was so drunk that she had to call our next-door neighbor to drive her to the hospital. My dad was too drunk to drive his wife to a hospital to give birth to his own son. Since that moment, he's never touched a beer. A little different from some of the other delightful goofs and blokes we've had, but this is a great story about how it's never too late to improve yourself. Good on ya, former boozy dad. One time, my dad took me to my college orientation back in '98. I grew up in an urban setting and wanted to mix it up, so I decided on an undergrad school in a very rural area. Read, not a lot of diversity. My dad's the best and always wants to goof around. We had this Jeep growing up that we called Little Blackie because it was, well, little and black. A running joke was that any time any of us in the family saw a similar-looking Jeep, one of us would yell, "Hey, look, it's Little Blackie. I bet you see where this is going." We're walking around campus, and sure enough, there was a Jeep parked within sight. My dad starts yelling, "Hey, look! Little Blackie! Little Blackie!" Of course, the only African-American kid on campus was walking right in front of us. My dad was oblivious and just kept right on yelling. The poor kid looked at me in disgust, and I was so very mortified, I just wanted to disappear. I ended up becoming really good friends with him later in my freshman year, and after I explained the whole story, he laughed really hard. Thank goodness. I still cringe thinking about it, though. When I was younger, I was a pretty high-level swimmer, so my mum would take me to events all over the country, leaving my dad and 10-year-old brother at home. I remember one time we went up north for a few days, just after we'd had our house insulated. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen what they do, but they essentially drill holes in your house and squirt insulation inside. It leaves loads of cream-colored spots all over the walls. Now, I remember just before we left for the event, my mum looked at my dad and said, "Make sure you paint the house." To which he replied, "Of course, dear." Fast forward 3 days, we're rolling up the drive at about midnight, towards a house that's now been floodlit. Multiple lights are now pointing at the White House with massive pink spots, with my dad and my 10-year-old brother stood on ladders covered in pink paint, looking very happy with themselves. Of course, after that, she was more specific with her instructions. She was not happy at the time, I can tell you. How did you use malicious compliance to absolutely wreck someone? My brother-in-law worked for UPS for 17 years. He was a bit of a joker and was constantly getting in trouble for coming to work with crazy hair colors or cornrows. He was a big Italian guy and was told it wasn't appropriate. It was always something, but they couldn't say anything about him wearing sunglasses. So his little rebellion was that he'd wear the most outrageous sunglasses he could think of. Ones shaped like giant red lips, guitars with the stems sticking up, purple ones with rhinestone hearts on them, anything for a laugh. After a while, people knew him by his glasses. If someone said they lived in a certain area, I'd say, "Oh, my brother-in-law is your UPS man, the guy with the crazy glasses." And their reply would almost always be something like, "Oh, John, yeah, I love that guy. He's funny." He passed away 4 years ago. He was hit by a drunk driver while he was out walking one night. When we attended his funeral, all of the guys from work came dressed in their browns with crazy sunglasses on. His best friend gave his eulogy wearing a pair of neon green glasses, 3 times the size of his face, and the pastor even borrowed John's guitar glasses when he went up to speak. After his funeral, we counted, he had over 200 different pairs. What started as him just being a pain in the butt to his boss, ended as a tribute to his character in life of always wanting to make someone else smile. My boss is a huge D-bag. All he does all day long is walk around and make sure everyone has their shirt tucked in, and generally be a negative Nelly who everyone hates. So I came into work on my birthday the other day and my friend runs up to me and yells, "Kevin, happy birthday!" right in front of my boss's office. He looks up and says, Kevin?" I'm thinking he's going to say happy birthday since he's no doubt heard her. Instead, he says, "Yeah, go ahead and tuck your shirt in, okay?" And he does the hand signal like he's tucking in an imaginary shirt. So I say, "Okay, no problem. I just have to put my stuff down real quick and I'll take care of it." So I walk over to my desk, which takes approximately 7 seconds to get to. I put my stuff down, and as I'm doing it, he comes up behind me again and says, "Kevin, I said tuck in your shirt." So I quickly tuck it in, and as he's walking literally right by me, I say, "Sorry, I just had to put my stuff down first." And he walks away like I never said a word. For the record, I work in a call center, so no customers actually ever see us. Also, this was more the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back in this situation. This guy had been steadily cutting our pay since he got the job, and everyone hated him more for that than anything. We used to have no dress code whatsoever, so the following is just a way of getting things back to the way they used to be. Immediately, I bust out my HR manual and check out the rule on tucked-in shirts. Turns out you must tuck in all shirts except a Hawaiian shirt or Gayabira shirt. So, I took my butt to Walmart and bought 10 of those motherfrickers and wore the most obnoxious Hawaiian-looking shirt the next day. The second I walked in, he looked me up and down, glared, turned around and walked away. When everyone asked why I was wearing such a ridiculous shirt, I told them about the loophole, and now half my office is wearing Hawaiian shirts and it's driving my boss crazy. All within the guidelines outlined by company policy. You know, although it does sound like your boss is just definitively a bad dude, I do have to hand it to him knowing the HR handbook so well that he immediately knew there was an exception for those shirts and just dropped it. Well done on you and your office mates for sticking it to him. A couple of friends of mine work at Walmart. They found out that kilts are well within the dress code as long as they're the correct color. Drove their managers nuts. It's been a year and absolutely no problems though. While I was in the Navy, it was recommended that I get an extensive surgery on my ankle. My command felt that I didn't deserve a bunch of time off for surgery, end quote, so they'd approve it but none of the convalescent leave. They refused to sign any paperwork. First thing I did was hit them with the regulation stating that they were required to respond to all requests within a certain amount of time. 3 days, I think. They responded with a no. So then I had Navy Legal draw up paperwork with accordance to regulations that my command would be responsible for 100% of my medical care if they didn't abide by my doctor's orders. I then let them know that that would mean that all of my medical care would then be handled by civilians and the command would be responsible for paying the bill out of their budget. They approved my surgery, convalescent leave, and convalescent leave extension. Used to work at a TV station, absolutely awful management and horrible bosses. Complained about it to friends all the time. Some would even ask me on Facebook about my job and I'd reply, but I knew I could get fired for speaking ill of the company. So I read the HR handbook and found out as long as I don't specifically name the company, I can't be fired for it. So about a month later, I realize I can't take this crap anymore and post on Facebook how terrible my job is, never mentioning the company by name. They fire me a day later, I gladly walk out of that building and into a lawyer's office, and I got $17,800, my yearly salary. Seriously. Feels good, man. I used to work for this small-town, twice-weekly newspaper. The editor and publisher, mayor, county commissioner, and a few other people were skimming tax dollars. When I confronted my boss about it, he told me he'd blackball me if I said anything. So I went to the local television station, tipped them off, and they uncovered the story. When they won their awards, my name was added to the list of reporters. I still can't get a job as a journalist, but damn if it didn't feel good. Worked in one corporate kitchen where our GM didn't like our music, so he'd put on children's music. So we all started singing along at the top of our lungs. We won that war of attrition. Years later, in another kitchen, we had surround sound in a closed kitchen, where the uppity GM didn't like our music and started passing draconian censorship rules about the music. So we switched it to children's music for a week. Moral of the story? Never underestimate the power of a kitchen crew of misfits singing Banana Phone at the top of their lungs to fight fascism, motherfricker. Viva la Raffi! Not so much a tuck-in shirt freak situation, but here it goes. My boss went away for 3 or 4 weeks for a conference, and while he was away, a workmate and I had an idea. A George Foreman grill, and then we'd go to the deli and grab stuff for lunch. Hamburgers, lamb chops, pork steaks, stuff like that. We did this every day for over a month, and when our boss got back, he put a stop to it with the exact words, "I don't want that thing inside the office." So we took it to the shared kitchen area on our floor. We'd rented a suite. When he got angry about that and said, "I don't want it on this floor," we took it down to the underground parking area and used the power outlet at his parking space while he was out at lunch. He caught us because he was coming back from lunch with a business partner in the car with him, and we were hunched over a tiny George Foreman grill making hamburger patties. Imagine 3 IT guys crouching on the ground like cavemen in a poorly lit underground parking lot cooking hamburgers on the concrete floor. Yeah, it went over about as well as you'd think. If he didn't specifically use the words, "take that home or I'll break it and throw it in the trash," our next step was going to be to use the power point in the parking lot of the church directly opposite to the building and facing his office. Back when I was working and attending classes, I'd go straight from campus to work, getting me anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes early before my shift. On occasion, my boss would ask me to help him out with something before I'd clock on, putting something away or answering the phone. Over the span of a couple of months, this evolved from occasionally to every day your shift starts when you get here. After doing this for a couple of weeks, still clocking in at my usual 3 p.m., I decide that if I'm working for a few extra minutes each day, I'm gonna get paid for it. I did this once, and I didn't make it an hour into my shift before my boss was screaming at me and throwing down the employee handbook, saying that I'm only allowed to clock in 5 minutes before and after my scheduled shift. Needless to say, I made it a point to not check in until 5 minutes after my scheduled shift every day, no matter how early I was. Fast forward 3 months and my boss got fired. He got what was coming to him. Yep, you can't let certain bosses take the extra stuff you do for granted. I'm also of the opinion that if they need a couple of extra seconds help carrying a box or something, they can have it for free, but if they want me doing my main work duties before my shift, that counts as starting my shift early. Not my story, but a co-worker's. We worked at a water park. Supervisor was a witch who wouldn't let the lead guards at the top of the tallest slide in the park go to the bathroom. The guard at the top is radioing that he needs to take a dump, but she won't let him. Mind you, the lead guards are allowed to ride down every once in a while to make sure no tubes are stuck. The lead guard is about to crap his pants in front of a ton of guests, so he goes into the utility closet and craps in a bucket of cat litter we keep to clean up vomit. He then proceeds to ride down the slide to clean himself off and left the supervisor to clean up his bucket of crap. My father was working in a post office in the early 80s. It was an unusually hot day, 85 degrees Fahrenheit inside. There were no fans available, so it was crazy. Men weren't allowed to wear shorts, but Dad came to work wearing shorts which covered his knees and part of his shins, figuring that would be fine. It wasn't fine, and his boss sent him home to change. He returned in his grandfather's bonjour from the late 19th century, top hat and all. The boss kept asking if it wasn't a little hot in that suit, but he said he was fine. Not work, but school. I'm a senior in high school, and one day a bunch of senior guys decided to start Tank Top Tuesday. Every Tuesday, about half the senior guys would come to school in a tank top. Our school had no rule about tank tops except that the straps had to be at least 2 inches thick, so we didn't anticipate any problem, especially considering girls at our school wore tank tops all the time. After the first instance, the school announced that boys were no longer allowed to wear tank tops, and when questioned why, they claimed that the visible armpit hair was a distraction that inhibited learning. The following Tuesday, we all went to school wearing tank tops and sporting shaved armpits. In short, school claims guys can't wear tank tops because armpit hair is distracting. Next day, half the senior guys show up in tank tops with shaved armpits. At a former workplace, the dress code changed. Men were no longer allowed to wear shorts. Women could wear skirts. I started wearing a kilt because skirts were okay in the rulebook. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not work-related, but school. In high school, I wore a t-shirt advertising a website that gave out free contraceptive. I was called down to the principal's office for 3 or 4 hours. My cool teachers thought it was awesome in the AM classes, and I was told I was promoting abhorrent behavior. I posited that I was in fact trying to prevent unwanted pregnancies. I lost my fight and was told I had to leave if I didn't have another shirt. Rather than leaving, I put a sticky note over the M in the problematic word and spent the rest of the day annoying faculty about fantastic lakeside condos that were being given away for free in freecondos.com. When Circuit City was still in business, I worked in the warehouse. For whatever reason, they had a strict dress policy of khaki pants, this awful collar shirt that also had to be tucked in as well. This went for everyone, even in warehouse. I discovered through an old warehouse employee guide, shoved in a drawer years ago and forgotten about, that as long as warehouse employees had khaki-colored shorts with no cargo pockets and a t-shirt with a Circuit City logo, there'd be no problem. Circuit City stopped making Circuit City t-shirts long before I started, but thanks to a local Salvation Army, I was able to pick up 2 Circuit City t-shirts and a quick trip to Target for some shorts, and now my new uniform was set. My managers were not happy about my appearance, claiming I looked sloppy and unkempt. Even better, there was the giant black dude from the warehouse who hated his job and just slept in the back and talked on his cell phone all day. When he found out about this new rule, he too had some old Circuit City t-shirts and joined in. Management hated us working together. I miss Circuit City. At my old school, they had rules about hair length, mostly for guys, and our teachers got pretty uptight about it. The only hard rules were that they couldn't pass our eyebrows or the collar area. Being the witty D-bag I was, I used a crap ton of gel to slick up my hair and do obnoxious things with it. It was all raised, so it never crossed my eyebrows or collar. I got away with it for 2 months until the principal changed the rules. All just because of me. Working at Big 5, there was a policy that men had to be clean-shaven or have a mustache. No beards or goatees or starburns. I cannot wear a mustache without looking like either a prevert or an 80s adult film star, but I hate shaving every day, so I grew out the biggest, creepiest Hulk Hogan stache ever witnessed and wore it proudly for the entire time I worked there. I work in food service. My job created a rule one day that one's hair cannot touch one's collar. I have rather long hair, but I always kept it in a braid and wore hats anyways. I was informed of this rule about 2 hours before the end of my shift and told that I had to comply immediately because I was breaking health code. I politely informed them that no, I was not. This was store policy, but I'd be happy to come in with my hair up the next day. I didn't think that was unreasonable. It takes a while. Not to mention pins and hair products and stuff to keep my hair up. That was not good enough apparently. Now. So I punched out for a break, brought rubber bands and floral wire, made 8 brands with the hair wire woven in, and stuck them in every direction. My boss saw me and began screaming. I calmly told him my hair wasn't touching my collar. In short, long hair not allowed to touch collar created obnoxious hairdo within regulations. Haha, and that, children, is how we had Edward Scissorhands working in our restaurant for a day until management caved. Good times, good times. I used to work at the Jaws ride at Universal Studios, Florida. Our uniform consisted of a blue shirt, jeans or jean shorts, white socks, and white shoes. The unofficial dress code had a lot of us girls wearing jean shorts and white knee socks. One summer, I ended up working the Jaws ride and the Jungle Cruise at Walt Disney World simultaneously. I love Disney and had always wanted to work there, but I ended up finding it stifling with all sorts of silly and over-the-top rules. At the Jungle Cruise, you had to wear a khaki shirt, khaki shorts or pants, white socks, and brown shoes. One day, I didn't have any normal-sized socks to wear to the Jungle Cruise, so I ended up wearing my white knee-highs, which looked ridiculous with the jungle costume. When I got to work, one of my managers flipped out and told me my socks weren't in compliance with the Disney look, the official policies on how to dress at Disney. He made me roll my socks down. It looked like I was wearing little white life preservers around my ankles and looked more out of place than they looked originally. I was annoyed, so when I went home, I scoured my Disney look booklet for the policies pertaining to socks. All I could find was that socks had to be long enough to cover the ankle bone. There was no maximum height. Heck, I could have worn the white tights under my khaki shorts if I really wanted to. The next day, I wore my knee-highs again as a small act of rebellion. The same manager was there and he flipped out. He actually pulled me into the office to write me up, but before he could get me to sign the paperwork, I pulled out my copy of the Disney look and showed him that, while incredibly silly-looking, my socks were perfectly acceptable and that I'd continue to wear them like that. And so I did. I looked stupid, but I didn't care. Working for Disney wasn't a pleasant experience in my opinion, and it was very liberating to know that I could at least wear my socks however the heck I wanted to. My boss told me, "You have to cover Joe this upcoming weekend, both days, since everyone else said no." I said, "How do you know I'll say yes?" And he said, "You have to. There's nobody left." I said, "You're wrong. I'm left, but I quit. Now there's nobody left." He was speechless. His expression was priceless. I stood there about 10 seconds and said, "I'm walking away now," and I left. Thank God this happened the day after I'd secretly secured a better job. Probably one of my fondest memories. When I was in the army, I pulled my car up to an ATM on base to get cash. 4 guys piled out, leaving all doors open. While getting my cash, from somewhere behind me someone says, "You actually drive that frickin' piece of crap? I should call for a tow truck." Without bothering to turn around, I yelled back, "Frick you and your tow truck." I never did see who it was, as he was gone by the time I had my money. Next day, my squad leader calls me aside and asks me if I told my staff sergeant, P, to go F himself yesterday. And I had to admit that yes, I probably had. So I was in trouble. I had 3 other witnesses who were interviewed and signed sworn statements to the fact that I'd told a staff sergeant to go F himself and a tow truck. I was given the opportunity to read the incriminating statements before I made my own, just to point out that there was no point in lying. That's when I found out that only one guy had even known who it was because he was in civilian clothes, not on duty. So my statement detailed an aggressively profane and hostile person in civilian attire, identity unknown to me, whom I found to be acting irrationally and attempted to diffuse further confrontation by, quote, responding jovially in kind fashion. The beauty was that without reading the other statements, I'd have been unable to mesh my version of events so perfectly with the bland facts the others reported. The key point is, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, there is no such thing as disrespecting a non-commissioned officer, only insubordination, which is very clear about being in uniform. At this point, everyone decided the best thing to do was sweep it under the rug, as Staff Sergeant P had far more to lose than I did, and magically everything went away. P continued to be a jerk to me at every opportunity, so I made a point of yelling, "Hey, P, frick you," whenever I saw him out of uniform. Eventually, my squad leader asked me to stop as a personal favor to him, so I did, but it was fun while it lasted. I went to a Catholic college and they didn't allow members of the opposite gender to spend the night in a dorm room. I made a huge case that they were discriminating against heterosexuals, and that rule miraculously disappeared the next year. I used to work at a lingerie store as an assistant manager, so I had to dress nice and look professional. All the other girls wore huge heels and always ended up complaining about how sore their feet were at the end of their shift, and I always wore flats to avoid having sore feet. They were still nice, stylish shoes, but they didn't have towering heels on them. My manager always used to get mad at me for not wearing heels and tried to claim it was part of dress code.
I looked it up and showed her that it didn't say anywhere that I had to wear heels, just that I had to wear acceptable work attire, or something like that, and she tried to tell me it was an out-of-date dress code or something, so I'd tell her that she should get an updated one then. Eventually, she brought head office into the argument, and the provincial manager was trying to tell me to wear heels to work. I told them they'd have to pay me more than minimum wage to ruin my feet. I did not get a raise, and nobody ever told me to wear heels to work ever again. Look, I know some women who like to wear heels whenever they can, but you really can't force employees on a sales floor to rock something that uncomfortable all the time. It's just not cool. You could definitely get Department of Labor on your butt if you put that in your handbook, which is likely why they weren't able to. Okay, on the flip side, I'm the boss enforcing the policy. When I took over the department, the old boss told me that the reason the place looked like crap was because when he asked a sales associate, who was on base pay plus commission, to clean or put up stock, they claimed it wasn't in their job description. The main boss backed them up, calling it a technicality. I pulled out the description and read out, "Other duties as assigned by the manager," on the last line. 2 out of 9 of them quit. My department is now clean and stock is always up. Sales are consistently up. I'm cool with that. I work at Panera, and we were recently told that we had to get non-slip or slip-resistant shoes, else risk being fired. Rather than buying the ugly black kind all of my co-workers got, I got a bright purple pair of Doc Martens. All of the managers gave me the stink eye and asked, "Are those slip-resistant?" "You bet they are, motherfrickers." My buddy and I came into the office on the last day in the job. We found there was no clause against taking the boxes from the shipping department and turning them into armor. The box knights were born and died on that day. No door was safe from our attacks. I worked at a PetSmart 5 or so years ago, in the pet hotel where animals were boarded while their pet parents or owners went on vacation. Everything I did was in the back. No customers ever saw me, just the dogs and kitties. But my witch boss would always get on to me for forgetting my belt. So one day she was particularly mad at me for not having a belt, despite the fact that I was picking that shift up last minute for someone who was sick. I picked up a dog leash, put it through my belt hoops and said, "Well, it appears I now have a belt, don't I?" In the Navy, you must always have a white t-shirt under your uniform. I had a senior chief who constantly checked if your t-shirt wasn't visible and required that it be seen. I checked the uniform regulations and noticed that while in a working uniform, you can wear a V-neck tee. I started wearing them and he took notice as soon as he saw me. I told him that the regs allowed it. He scowled and his only comment was, "One for the blue shirts," and walked away. Then he hammered me for every reg violation he could find. You see, smart Alex never win, at least not in today's Navy. What weird and wonderful facts keep you awake at night? The United States hasn't minted any new Purple Heart medals since World War II. We've been using the stockpile that was prepared in anticipation of the ground invasion of Japan. We were anticipating so many casualties. We can't prove we aren't in a simulation. Schizophrenia's hallucinations are shaped by culture. Americans with schizophrenia tend to have more paranoid and harsher voices or hallucinations. In India and Africa, people with schizophrenia tend to have more playful and positive voices. There's a really new treatment called avatar therapy. It has a computer character mimic the particular person's malicious hallucinations, but gradually over time its voice and expressions become more friendly and controllable by the patient. Apparently, this treatment has the effect of giving the patient more control over the hallucinations and either getting rid of them completely or making the hallucinations more positive in nature. Since its discovery in 1930, Pluto has not yet made a full orbit of the Sun. It went from undiscovered to planet to not planet in less than 1 Pluto year. The Geyser Sphinx is so old that it was the ancient Egyptians themselves who performed the first restoration after digging it out from under the dunes over 1,000 years after it had been built. The sinking of the Titanic was a miracle to the lobsters in the galley. About 40% of the world's food is just wasted, and a lot of that is before it even hits the shelves. Cows kill more Americans than radical terror actors, most years. We should probably be turning the cows and the terror fighters against each other. There are now legally adult movie stars who were born after the year 2000. I remember IDing someone at my bar born in the year 2000 and being deeply unhappy when I realized that they were legally adults. All 6 of the stars of Friends negotiated 2% syndication rights for the show. Friends still makes about $1 billion yearly through reruns and Hulu and the other services. All 6 of the friends collect a $20 million check annually. Yes, that means David Schwimmer still gets $20 million a year for doing nothing. So, when you're alone in your one-bedroom apartment, watching Friends and snickering about how all of them are losers who haven't been famous since, there's a reason why. They don't have to work, ever again. Well, this comment was written before the sad passing of Matthew Perry, but in aging has provided us with yet another example of the proven fact that being rich doesn't necessarily make one content or happy, and often does the opposite. Over the space of 3 days, an estimated 165 people survived both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bomb attacks. Tsutomu Yamaguchi is one of the more famous ones, who was only 2 miles from ground zero when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. It hit when he was walking to work on the last day of a work trip. After he heard the drone of a plane, he looked up into the sky and then it lit up. He was plucked from the ground, spun around and tossed into a nearby potato field. Miraculously, he survived, despite being covered in burns, soaked in radiation, and with 2 blown eardrums. He spent a night in an air shelter and then took an overnight sleeper train home to Nagasaki to see his family. When he made it to a hospital in Nagasaki, he was so burnt a childhood friend didn't recognize him. Neither did his family. Despite his wounds, he made it to work the next day. He started giving his boss a rundown on what had happened, and his boss thought he was crazy. There was no way one bomb could destroy a city. Suddenly, a bright light lit up the room. He panicked and dropped to the floor of the office seconds before the shockwave smashed out the office windows. He had just been hit twice by nuclear blasts in the space of 3 days. At the age of 93, he was given the title Niyu Hibakusha, or twice-bombed person. He died the year afterwards. So, next time you think you're having a crappy week at work, yeah. Google's DeepMind self-learning AI, AlphaZero, spent 4 hours learning chess and proceeded to beat the top chess engine in the world. The particularly interesting part is that it wins by playing in a very human way. Chess engines tend to run algorithms to assess the board after a move is chosen, looking at millions of moves every second, and decide whose is better based on a set of parameters, making their play very direct. AlphaZero seemed to develop a far more human playstyle, somehow seeing something less quantifiable than led to an advantage in position. Over the past 200 years, numerous chess masters studied a style of play similar to that of AlphaZero. That means that in 4 hours, AlphaZero developed a better understanding of the game than we could over the more than 1,000 years it's been studied. Lobsters just don't die of old age. Taking into consideration that humanity has only explored a small percentage of the ocean, there could very well be a big fricking lobster just chilling out there. And I should clarify that the square cube law prevents kaiju-sized ones, but there are still some pretty big ones out there that we don't really get to see. I saw one on the internet that was 4 foot long, had 2 foot long legs, and weighed 14 pounds. Still pretty cool. If you take into account the fact that on average people sleep or should sleep 8 hours a day, if and when you get to 99 years of age, you'll have only been awake for 66 years, having spent 33 years of your life sleeping. And that's why I always stay up late. As you get closer to a black hole, time goes slower. This means that everything farther away would experience time faster and faster as you get closer and closer to the black hole. A second for you could be 1 billion years for those outside of it. Thus, if you fell into a black hole and looked outside, you'd see the universe die with you. When Star Trek The Next Generation first aired, Data was roughly 60,000 times faster than the fastest computer on Earth. Today, the same character, Data, is roughly 500 times slower than the current fastest computer. There is on average a supernova explosion every 50 years in the Milky Way. On average, there are 30 every second in the observable universe. This is probably one of the best let that sink in facts in here. Let me just repeat that. Do you know how big the universe must be if it's 30 every second, while one of them takes 50 years in our galaxy? Fanta started as a Coca-Cola substitute in the early 1940s Germany under the reign of, well, that party. Fruit Loops are all the same flavor. Next to the US Army, Disney World is the largest buyer and importer of explosives in the USA. I was wondering what Mickey needed nukes for before I remembered that fireworks exist. Oh-ho! Mutually assured destruction! There are more tigers privately owned in Texas than free tigers in the wild. The moon orbits us from the west to the east, but we see it move across the sky east to west because of the rate of the Earth's rotation. Our observation is like being in a faster car watching a slower car, heading in the same absolute direction, fall further and further behind us. If the Earth was the size of a marble, you'd need 7 miles of space to build a scale model of the solar system. Due to the way the speed of light works, combined with our current understanding of the expansion of the universe, there are areas of the universe that are both impossible for us to visit or even observe. The fabric of the universe expands faster over that distance than light can travel, so it never reaches us. When you combine that with the bit where scientists currently think there's roughly 1 trillion visible galaxies, that's 4 times more stars than exist in the Milky Way, well… There was a time in history when trees existed, but the fungi which causes wood to rot had not yet evolved to digest wood. Dead trees and plants would pile up, and the 35% oxygen atmosphere caused massive fires. This is also the time where petrified wood came from. Trees would sit in the mud for thousands of years and not rot, while minerals slowly replaced the wood structures. The first electric car was invented at the end of the 1800s, and it went 65 miles per hour. Yep, mainstream electric transport has a very long history and has actually been a legitimate option for development the entire time. Unfortunately, it's almost always sabotaged, misused, or taken advantage of by bad actors. Classic humans. The entire continent of South America is east of Florida. Go look at a map. Charlemagne's name translates to Charles the Great. This wasn't due to his leadership, this was due to the fact that he was 6'4" when the average male was 5'6". His nickname was just Big Charlie. There was a period of time where 4 distinct species of human lived concurrently. Neutron stars have such strong gravity that if you dropped a marshmallow into one, it would be like dropping a 3-megaton nuclear warhead on Earth. It took humanity approximately 4 times longer to switch from copper swords to steel swords than it took to switch from steel swords to nuclear bombs. Bing Crosby advocated for salmon conservation in the North Atlantic against Denmark's overfishing in the early 1970s. The Danish government banned everything Bing Crosby in Denmark, but because he was so popular there, the Danish people protested the government, making them overturn the Bing Crosby law and even to enact salmon conservation legislation. Bing Crosby single-handedly managed to create a piece of Danish law. Scientists who work with cockroaches often develop allergies towards cockroaches. At the same time, they also develop allergies to pre-ground coffee. I work for a large coffee roaster. When you cut open the bags of green coffee from all of those third-world countries, it's amazing the things you find. Coffee is essentially dried in the middle of streets, and any number of things can end up in there. We found shoes, farming tools, huge needles for weaving the bags, 100% chance of bugs in coffee from some places, and the good news is those little guys are roasted to 400 degrees and disintegrated by the time the roast is over. The Titanic had 2 sister ships, the Britannic and the Olympic. There was a woman called Violet Jessup, a nurse and cruise liner stewardess that worked on all 3 ships. The Olympic crashed into a warship while leaving the harbor, but was able to make it back. So she was on Titanic as it sank, and is referenced in the Titanic film, a stewardess that was told to set an example to the non-English-speaking passengers as the ship sank. She looked after a baby on Lifeboat 16 until being rescued by the Carpathia the next day. It's not known what exactly caused the sinking of the Britannic, but the lifeboats hit the water too early. As the ship sank, the rear listed up and a number of lifeboats were sucked into the propellers. Violet had to jump out of the lifeboat she was in and sustained a serious head injury, but survived. She was on board for all 3 incidents in the space of 5 years. But she went back to continue to work at sea for another 30 years before retiring in 1950. She died of heart failure in 71. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. China at one point used more concrete in 3 years than the US used in the entire 20th century. There's about 12 times more trees on Earth than stars in the Milky Way. There was only 65 years between the Wright brothers' first flight and the moon landing. The Holy Roman Empire existed until 30 years after the United States was founded. There are more chickens in America than people on the planet. Gwen Stefani is older than Ted Cruz. Didn't believe it, Googled, and it's true. That crap is bananas. When NASA pitched the idea of the Voyager mission to Richard Nixon with the idea of touring the outer planets, he was told that the last time it was possible, Thomas Jefferson was in the White House. The particular planetary alignment that Voyager 2 used on its journey occurs only once every 176 years. Your bones are wet. If the Sun were scaled down to the size of a white blood cell, the Milky Way galaxy would be the size of the continental United States. The vastness of space is mind-boggling. We are closer to the 2050s than the 1990s. If you live in the USA, you have better odds of dating Taylor Swift than dying of bird flu and Ebola combined. Oh, now you're just trying to scare us. In the span of the Star Wars sequel trilogy, the Cleveland Browns won one game. The man who invented the Frisbee was cremated and turned into a Frisbee. Anne Frank and Martin Luther King were born in the same year, and Queen Elizabeth and Marilyn Monroe were born 1 month apart. Stegosaurus lived 150 million years ago. T-Rex lived 65 million years ago. Stegosaurus was more ancient to the T-Rex than the T-Rex is to us. The Great Pyramid was built before the last woolly mammoth died. So it appears that after the first batches of answers here, a lot of the facts that seem to blow our commenters' minds are just the sheer scale of time in the universe. Admittedly, it is fascinating to get the perspective, but I'll try and spread them amongst the other rarer answers that we're getting here. Vending machines have killed more people than sharks. Well, duh. Why would vending machines go around killing sharks? Pineapples take 2 years to grow. You could place all of the planets of our solar system between Earth and the Moon and even have a bit of spare space afterwards. But 10 out of 10 scientists all agree that this is a bad idea and should not be attempted. The US federal government classifies the white powdery stuff as a less serious, more useful substance than Mary J., also known as green herb. When humans first started farming, blue eyes in humans hadn't evolved yet. The cigarette lighter was actually invented before the match. Dozens of Americans die every day from slipping in the shower and hitting their heads. Dozens, I tell you. It's one of the primary leading causes of non-medical deaths in the USA. After hitting the iceberg, it took 2 hours and 40 minutes for the Titanic to fully submerge underwater. Let that sink in. The more I think about it, the more I realize that it took people quite a while to realize how significant it was, and that getting off a huge ocean liner would take so much time. The US Navy has the second largest air force in the world, and the US Army has the third. The UK Dyslexia Association is situated in Reading, which is spelt like the word reading just to mess with everyone. Gary Newman is older than Gary Oldman by a little under 2 weeks. What's new is old and what's old is new. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump were all born within a 66-day stretch. Macaulay Culkin is now older than Catherine O'Hara was when she played his mum in Home Alone, and Mark Hamill in The Force Awakens is older than Alec Guinness was in A New Hope. If you have clean water and temperature control, you're better off than half the population. Sharks are older than trees, or at least they predate them. The oldest shark fossils we know of are 420 to 450 million years old. The oldest known tree is Watiza, which is about 385 million years old. AIDOWita, the longest living animal ever, was a giant tortoise given to Clive of India. He was born around 1750 and died in 2006. When he died, he had existed for longer than the United States had at the time. Your computer is much more likely to contract a virus by surfing legitimate church websites than by surfing adult websites. The latter sites generally have experts combating viral stuff, while church sites are maintained by lower-tech volunteers as a rule. The overall goal in golf is to play less golf, incidentally analogous to my approach at my job. Oxford University is actually older than the Aztecs. Let me explain. The University of Oxford, informally Oxford University or simply Oxford, is a collegiate research university located in Oxford, England. It has no known date of foundation, but there's evidence teaching goes as far back as 1096, making it the oldest university in the English-speaking world and the world's second oldest university in continuous operation. It grew rapidly from 1167 when Henry II banned English students from attending the University of Paris. After disputes between students and Oxford townfolk in 1209, some academics fled northeast to Cambridge, where they established what became the University of Cambridge. The two ancient universities are frequently jointly referred to as Oxbridge. The Aztec Empire, or the Triple Alliance, began as an alliance of three Nuhua, Altepetl city-states: Mexico, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. These three city-states ruled the area in and around the Valley of Mexico from 1428 until the combined forces of the Spanish conquistadors and their native allies under Hernan Cortés defeated them in 1512. France was still using the guillotine when the first Star Wars film came out. To be in the top 1% of Americans in terms of income, you need to rake in about $400,000 a year, rounded off to about $1,000 a day. The US dropped 26,172 bombs in 2016. That's almost 72 per day. That's about 3 bombs an hour, every hour, for the entire year. In 2017, the US had already dropped more bombs than that by September. Your body consists of a roughly 1-to-1 ratio of bacterial to human cells. Tasty, tasty. You hear that, folks? We're about 50% germs. Remember to eat enough food to share with everybody in your body. If you make the choice not to have children, you're the first person in your direct ancestry, all the way back to the first humans related to you, to do so. Actually, you'd be the first organism in your line not to reproduce all the way back to the very first organism 4 billion or so years ago. A real trailblazer. Great fact. The Teotihuacan pyramids, known to be the most architecturally significant Mesoamerican pyramids, were not built by the Aztecs. The Aztecs found them abandoned, settled there, and gave them their names. The origin of their founders are still a mystery. I studied Mesoamerican cultures in college for some reason, and it's not that great of a mystery. There's not a consensus on what the people called themselves because they'd vacated by the time the Nahuatl or the Aztecs arrived. However, it's pretty safe to say its founders were from around the mountains of northern central Mexico, and archaeologists actually know quite a bit about their culture. It's amazing and also terrifying knowing that a civilization capable of building something like that could just vanish without a trace. It's the same thing with the canal system in Arizona. It was built by a native tribe and abandoned, and no one knows why. Being able to move all of that water around the desert was and is an incredible infrastructure achievement, and then they just left. The majority of the first American settlers only survived their first winter by eating their dead children. I mean, it makes sense. Have you tried eating them while they're still alive? Astronomer here. I always like that the coldest place we know of in the universe is on Earth. Even a dense dust cloud in space, aka the coldest spots we know of, are a few degrees above absolute zero, the coldest temperature there is. In laboratories on Earth, however, it's quite common to get a few fractions of a degree above absolute zero for experiments. Ergo, you don't remember being born or most of the first year of your existence. All you know is one day you just started existing and taking in experiences and memories. Scientists haven't found out one particular brain component responsible for consciousness. There is no physical proof of consciousness, it just is. All that stuff you learn about in history class about civilizations rising up and dying out, and about certain groups killing off others and taking over their lands, that stuff is still happening right now. Snipers are supposed to camp. The overwhelming majority of hands you've touched in your life have had a man's eggplant in them at one point. About 1 million people die every year from mosquito bites. That's 2,700 per day or 100 every hour. Think about how many must have died since you first started watching this video. Cleopatra was born closer to the moon landing than when the pyramids were built. A single iPhone today is more powerful than every computer NASA had combined in 1969 during the first lunar landing. They got people to the moon using slide rules. Red, green, and yellow peppers are just the same plant at different levels of ripeness. How is this not upsetting to everyone else? Every subsequent year of your life makes up a smaller proportion of it relative to your previous years of living. So at 1 year old, a year is 100% of your life. At 2, it's 50%, and so on. Maybe that's why time feels like it passes more quickly the older we get. There are more Mary J. dispensaries in Colorado than McDonald's, 7-Eleven, and Starbucks combined. The city of Atlanta in Texas is closer to Atlanta, Georgia, 3.5 states away, than it is to El Paso, Texas. That's just how big Texas is. Also, Bristol, Tennessee is closer to Canada than it is to Memphis, Tennessee. If you have 2 legs, you strictly speaking have more than the average amount of legs across the entire human population, and literally only one person would need to lose a leg to have this happen. Averages are weird. The average hours of minimum wage work needed to pay for 4 years of public college was 306 hours for baby boomers and is 4,459 for millennials. The universe is so empty that if we took 3 grains of sand and placed them inside a vast cathedral, that cathedral would be more filled with sand than the universe is with stars. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.